notably Senator Langford of Oklahoma, really trying very hard to come together on a bipartisan solution to our borders. I think this bill was brought to the floor several times this year, and then former President Trump intervened, and it fell apart. And so then we see today that the president deciding to act unilaterally on executive order around the border. So similarly, given the gridlock in this Congress, that the executive action on work permits can continue and also be granted for people, particularly people that have been here for decades working. Many of them are married to U.S. citizens. We actually have 1.1 million U.S. citizens in our country who are married to undocumented spouses on average for 16 years. Just kind of bonkers to think about that people with such deep roots in our nation are still unable to have a path to permanence because of our broken immigration system. So I think to your point, ideally, right, things are done on a bipartisan basis by congressional action, but we've just seen this Congress again and again, even on something that both sides have agreed on, like border security, we can't even make any progress. And so as such, we're calling on the president to also do executive action on legal work permits and something that everyday Americans support.
Well, as you call on this president to take action, having referred to the 1,400 CEOs and employers you represent, Rebecca, this is an election year. Who do they trust more with reforming the immigration system, Joe Biden or Donald Trump?
I would say that just where we are on the issue has been, sadly, a failure of both sides. I mean, we are operating under a menagerie of the alphabet soup for our visa system that was created in 1986. So over nearly 40 years ago was the last time we had a reform to our immigration system. And our economy today, it doesn't look anywhere like how it looked in 1986. And so the politics always keep getting in the way of this issue. And the thing is that just everyday Americans understand that we need to have legal, orderly border crossings, and as well as bring people out of the shadow, especially people that have been here working, paying taxes for decades with American family members. Just again and again, for our dreamers, for our mixed status families, it always polls so well. It doesn't change because Americans know that those are the right solutions to fix this super outdated and just honestly beyond frustrating immigration issue.
Rebecca, it's great to have you. Rebecca Shih, founding executive director of the American Business Immigration Coalition. Kaylee, we expect to hear from Joe Biden about 10 minutes from now. We'll be in the East Room of the White House, assuming things are on time. That's not always the case, of course, when it comes to reality. I'll be curious to hear if he takes any questions from reporters or if we get a statement and we're right back out of the room.
Yeah, of course, the questions he could be asked vary far from the border issue. He could be asked about the conviction of Donald Trump, or he could be asked about geopolitics, as there are a number of geopolitical issues in play in the news today.
That's for sure. And we're seeing headlines across the terminal on elections in India, with the official count confirming Prime Minister Modi's bloc can form a government here. He's claiming victory, but short of a majority alone, something that we wanted to discuss with Bloomberg's Enda Curran, who joins us now at the table. The economic implications here are huge. Enda, we heard upon Modi's visit not that long ago to the White House, with Joe Biden, that this was the future of international investment. That was the conversation at the White House that night, and it was a who's who of CEOs, as you remember, who were at the state dinner. What do the results of this election tell us about that, Ron?
Well, it's definitely a shock, and it just shows you that this is the year of elections. We did expect some policy shock along the way. Now we're getting one out of India. I guess two angles on it, Joe. Domestically, why did it happen? And then what will that mean for India's economy? How will it impact India's own domestic policy program, their welfare spending, their borrowing, their like? So there's a whole domestic India question that will need to be worked out in the weeks and months ahead. But globally, though, I completely agree. India under Modi had become this kind of a star performer, surging markets, one of the world's fastest growing economies. It had been seen as an alternative to China, really capitalizing on the geopolitical fracas between China and the US post-pandemic, setting itself up as an alternative for investment. And as you said, of course, coming here to Washington last year and having that state visit, etc. So it's a big question to where that goes from now, because Modi has said he will form the next government, but he's obviously weakened. So it's going to be a question of what kind of Modi can it be if he does form the next government. What kind of Modi will it be, and how long can he last?
Yeah, how diminished is he as a result of this? But if he can form this alliance kind of coalition, does that give him the same kind of power that a majority in parliament would have, or does it open him to vulnerabilities like what we're seeing in Israel, for example, where you have Netanyahu in power because of a coalition government, but because of competing factions of the coalition, it makes him much more vulnerable domestically. Just how should we be thinking about how this moves forward?
Domestically, he will obviously have to do some horse trading. He will have to bring in certain factions for support, and that will mean divvying up policy whatever way he has to keep those constituencies happy. That's the domestic story. The question does become how will it change India on the global front? And as I'm saying to you, this is a shock. The markets have sold off. It's given investors pause for thought. Looking at India, they thought it was this rock of stability. But nonetheless, you'd have to wonder whether the external political story for India will change that dramatically. They'll want to maintain to be seen as a source for investment. Come here with your money. We remain an alternative to China, cutting bureaucracy and the rest. I don't think that story will change too dramatically.
Well, certainly not as an alternative to China. You put your finger on it. That was the narrative here in Washington. That part doesn't change, is your point, if Modi's face is still in front of the government.
Yeah, and you would assume from India's point of view, they don't want that to change. No matter who's in office or who, to your point, Kayleigh, or the coalition backing him, they want foreign investment, they want foreign money, they want foreign companies to come there to give them both know-how, capital, and create employment. So it is a headline shock, but it remains to be seen just how it does change.
But if you're Apple, this doesn't change your plans to move into India.
You would assume not, and Modi in his remarks earlier said he's going to carry on with his reform program, so I think that part of the story shouldn't change, but of course it remains to be seen what kind of government is formed and if they do change their tune, but that would be a major surprise, I think.
All right, Bloomberg's Enda Curran, thank you so much for reporting on this for us, and it's worth pointing out, Joe, you recall that visit from Narendra Modi here in Washington not too long ago. There were those who were critical of the administration getting cozier with India over concerns about things like human rights, and I wonder to what extent those concerns are what ultimately led to this surprising result today.
It's happening before our eyes, and we'll have a lot more on this in the late edition of Balance of Power. I'll meet you then at 5 o'clock on Bloomberg TV and radio.
In the meantime, President Biden set to speak in just moments. We'll have full coverage of that for you right here on Bloomberg.
is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. This is Bloomberg Business Week for this Tuesday, June 4th. I'm Carol Masser along with Tim Stenevec. Let's get to the setup on this Tuesday. We are a little over 1 week away from the next FOMC meeting. And on that, jolting the bond market a little bit in expectations when it comes to Fed moves, Tim. Data showing further signs of labor market cooling and giving a bit more fuel to the idea of could we maybe, yes, possibly get a Fed rate cut this year?
Yeah, more on that with Molly Smith in just a moment. Also, a top global story today, a political earthquake in India as Prime Minister Modi's party loses its majority in parliament. We're going to tell you why you need to care about this.
Yeah, big story, no doubt about it. We've talked about global elections this year, and that is certainly one of the big ones. Speaking of caring our ever-warming environment, get ready to say goodbye to El Nino and hello to La Nina. Bottom line, it's going to be hot, everybody.
All right, I got no good transition for this one, but psychedelic stocks are in focus as an FDA panel reviews a new drug that's based on ecstasy. We check in with Tiffany Carey a little later in the program.
Yeah, really important story there. Plus, one more thing, one major Wall Street bank boosting parental leave. We're going to dig into the details a little bit later this hour. First up, though, let's get to the markets, the trade, and your big stories. Here is Charlie Kelley.
Thank you very much. Here's what's going on. We got the Dow very close to session highs right now, right to the numbers up 87, a gain of 0.2%. S&P, though, in the red, lower by 7, down by about 0.1%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 34, drop there of 0.2%. The bond market climbed as signs of labor market cooling reinforce speculation. The Fed will be able to cut rates this year. 10-year, 4.32%. The 2-year, 4.75%. Spot gold down 0.9%, 23.29 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 0.8%, 73.64 a barrel on WTI. Bitcoin holding above 70,681 right now on Bitcoin, up by about 2.3%. Sources tell Bloomberg CoreWeave, which is a closely held cloud computing provider, is offered to acquire Core Scientific for about $1 billion. Core Scientific shares surging by 41.1%. Recapping, stocks are mixed. S&P lower, S&P down now by about 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it, Charlie. Thank you so much. It's big week for U.S. economic data, incredibly so on the labor front. This morning we found out that U.S. job openings fell in the month of April to the lowest level in over 3 years, consistent, Tim, with a gradual slowdown in the labor market.
Yeah, the Bureau of Labor Statistics Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, also known as JOLTS, showed available positions decreased to 8.06 million from a downwardly revised 8.36 million reading in the prior month. The figure below all estimates in a Bloomberg survey of economists.
All right.
With more, we got Bloomberg News economics editor Molly Smith, who's here in the Bloomberg studio. Molly, we're both just so excited to talk to you.
I could sense that.
But look, we did get a little bit of a reset when it came to the bond market. Finally, some very Fed-friendly news coming from the jobs market.
Yeah, I think, there's always so many caveats with these reports that it's like you get one reaction with the headline number and then it's like, oh, wait, let's dig beneath the surface and maybe this isn't as good as we think it is. That didn't really happen today. I mean, this was really categorically showing a broad slowdown in labor demand really across all industries and still showing hiring is still relatively slow. Layoffs are still historically low, so that's great news. And the quits rate, which is still really low, and that's great news for the Fed officials who are like, when quits were really high and people are just like leaving their jobs left and right, getting these bigger pay raises. That's not happening as much now. So this is all good news on the inflation
Good news
front.
for the Fed.
For the Fed.
For the Fed.
But if you are somebody who's looking for a job, not so great.
All right, but wait, perspective. So we're not seeing a ton of firings, maybe a slowdown in hiring. The job market's still considered strong.
Absolutely, yes. And I mean, as we're going to get probably more evidence of on Friday with the main jobs report for the month of May, that you're still going to get a payrolls number. The estimate right now is close to 200,000 and an unemployment rate still under 4%. That's hardly a weak labor market.
Okay, what's a return to normal levels for JOLTS? Like, if we're talking pre-pandemic here, what would be like a typical number that we'd want to see?
I mean, more probably in the 7 million or under range, and now we're down to 8. Remember, this number peaked 2 years ago above 12 million, so has come down pretty remarkably, and again, the unemployment rate's still staying pretty low.
All right, that's the perspective we needed. We're cutting it short because we're waiting for President Biden and we want to get to another top story. But Molly, thank you so much. So appreciate it. Bloomberg News economics editor Molly Smith, we'll have her back really, really soon. So that is the big news, certainly here in the U.S. But let's get to some big political news, Tim, outside the United States.
Yeah, the surprising outcome is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party lost its majority in parliament. Modi must now rely on allies to form a government for the first time since he stormed power. That was a decade ago. India's stocks had their worst day in more than 4 years, Carol, as the closer than expected results came in. We've talked about this being a big year for global elections. This one certainly among them.
All right, so let's get to it. Bloomberg News senior editor Bobby Ghosh is here in studio. Bobby, by the way, previously covering foreign affairs, special focus on the Middle East and the wider Islamic world. He was Time Magazine's Baghdad bureau chief prior to joining Bloomberg. He is really a go-to for us on so many things impacting global affairs. So great to have you here with us and help us put some perspective. Before voting kicked off on April 19th, the Prime Minister boldly predicted that his alliance would win a whopping 400 seats. What happened? And for those who know very little or maybe even nothing about politics in India, why is this so striking?
Well, it's striking because this is a figure, Narendra Modi, who has dominated the Indian political landscape like no politician going back a couple of generations. For 10 years, he's been front and center of Indian politics. He sort of commanded an aura of invincibility, and his party, which is very, very good at messaging, very disciplined at messaging, conveyed that message ahead of this election. And this election was not just a referendum of his party, it was very much about him. The entire messaging of the election was around vote for Modi, even though this is a parliamentary election. So if you can imagine the closest American sort of comparison would be if in the midterms the Republicans went out to all their voters in the Senate and in the Congress, but their message was vote for Trump.
Right.
Not for me, vote for Trump. That was the kind of messaging that went into this election. And so this is a personal failure on the part of Modi. They'd set the bar very, very high, 400 seats. They've gotten, the bare minimum to get a majority is 272. The party by itself looks more likely to get 240. Now, it has allies, and it can form a coalition, so it's very likely it'll remain in government. Modi may remain prime minister, but his personal prestige has taken a real battering.
Modi already spinning this as a victory.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, though, sort of playing not even Monday morning quarterback at this point, where did the pollsters go wrong? Why did we see the exit polling show such a stark difference to the vote tally? Explain.
Well, I think some real deep investigations are going to have to be done into that exit polling. The numbers are so, I mean, we've
That's
become
why this
used
was
to
so
it, right?
shocking.
Yeah, we've become used to it in recent years all over the world. People tell pollsters one thing, and then when they go to vote, they do something else.
Right.
This is a problem in this country just as much as in others. But the gap between what the exit polls are showing and what the results now seem to be indicating, I haven't seen a gap that wide in any major election anywhere in the world. So something has gone terribly amiss. This is not simply, I would suggest, not simply a case of people telling pollsters one thing and doing something else. I think something more structural might be, there may be more structural problems here.
Structural, but not like something, I don't know. Who knows? Okay.
Yeah,
So
you know, as I said, a deep investigation is called for, and then we'll comment on that when it happens.
I want to get your comments, though, on voters feeling left out of India's growth, the growing inequality, pervasive joblessness, rising labor costs. Feels very, very similar. What is this a vote against, though? Is it a vote against Modi, the personality, or a vote against, listen, I don't feel so good?
Well, for one thing, there's a strong anti-incumbency vote, right? This party has been in power for a long time. People would like to see the other side get a try. That's just human nature. That happens with democratic elections all over the world. But the other thing is that Modi's message of economic success has left out huge numbers of Indians. This is the world's most populous country. And a lot of Modi's messaging is, look at how many billionaires we've created in the last 10 years, or in the time that I've been in power. 800 million Indians still depend on highly subsidized handouts from the government, from food, and that cohort of people, that's a lot of people, were not included in this message of look how many billionaires we've created. And a lot of the votes, as the patterns that we're seeing is that he seems to have lost sort of a momentum in rural parts of the country. Farmers, those are the poorest of the poor in India, tend to come from the rural heartland states, where for a long time Modi was dominant, the BJP was dominant. Their message was vote for us and all boats will rise. You will rise up from this menial labor you're doing in the farm, and you too will have a chance at economic success.
Why isn't it rising up? I don't want to go trickle down, I feel like, but why isn't it spreading out?
Well, that's the nature of so much of India's economic growth over the last many years, is that it has not been a growth that has included everybody. India's growth has come from the problem of unemployment has not been reckoned with in this growth. This is a jobless growth for a large part, for the most part. It is not creating enough jobs. This is a giant country, huge numbers of people, tens of millions of people are coming into working age every year. The economy, even though it's one of the fastest growing economies in the world, is not creating tens of millions of jobs. So there's a square and there's a circle, and these are not going to match.
So continuing with the economic implications of this, we saw the stock market, or we saw Indian stocks, I should say, have their worst day in more than 4 years.
Yep.
Obviously, markets don't like surprises. But I do wonder about the economic implications of this globally, Bobby, and what it means for a country that is trying to transition from a developing country to a developed country.
I'm not terribly worried about the Indian economy, I will say this, because so much of Modi's economic policies were built on a platform that the previous government, dominated by Congress Party, laid down those foundations. Now the Congress is back. In terms of economics, in terms of needing investments, there's not a whole lot of sunlight between the BJP and the Congress Party and its allies. There may be some differences in prioritization, but for the large part, they both agree that India needs foreign investment, Indian economy needs reforms, Indian businesses need support, India needs to be creating more jobs, and those jobs have to come primarily from the private sector. There's a lot they have in common in their economic vision, although if you ask them directly, they would deny that furiously. Equally on foreign policy too, this is the same thing. Both countries recognize that India's association, India's ties with the United States are crucial, that India and the United States have a common concern about China's growing influence in the world. India, which borders China, which went into war with China in the early 1960s, feels the heat very closely. I don't expect big changes there. I think a lot of this has been, the election has been to a substantial degree about how the parties regard minorities in the country. The BJP, which is a very Hindu nationalist party, during this election, more than ever before, there was some really strident anti-minority and particularly anti-Muslim speeches from the Prime Minister on down. The Congress Party and its allies come from an older, more secular, more inclusive kind of politics. And I think that is what won out at the end of the day. But more than, again, to come back to where I started, more than anything else, this is the Indian voters voting against Modi rather than voting for anybody else.
So, Bobby, is this the beginning of a new chapter in terms of India's political history?
It could very well be. We've seen this movie before.
Okay.
Coalitions, large, unwieldy coalitions, trying to form a government, sometimes succeeding but not being able to hold together the sum of their parts, and another election coming up in quick succession. Now, if Modi can hold together his coalition partners, and the two main coalition partners are notorious for switching camps. They've done it so many times in recent years that Modi will have gone to bed tonight concerned a little bit about whether he can keep his partners. If he can hold together his coalition, he will continue to be prime minister. But he will no longer have that swagger, and he will have to deal. Momentum is everything in politics, right? He will have to deal with an opposition in parliament that is much stronger than before, but feels like it has the wind in its sails, that will feel more emboldened to press against his policies, to push against whatever he's trying to do, particularly on social issues. And so he will not be able to govern with the confidence and the I use the word again, swagger that he had before.
So, Bobby, if he's not able to govern with the confidence and swagger that he had before, where should we look to for change? Where would you expect to see changes as a result of this election outcome?
Well, a lot of the changes will be more optical than actual, shall we say. I think the fact that the rejection of this politics of bigotry, the politics of identifying and targeting minorities, the politics of sort of a majoritarian view of religion, that India should be Hindu. I think all of that will recede, at least for a while. You know, a great deal is going to depend on what the opposition can do with the momentum that it has.
Right.
Rahul Gandhi, who's leading the opposition coalition, has not been in this place before. He is an untested quantity in this situation. He has run a Congress party that has long been a family fiefdom, and nobody dares to raise a voice against him. He has not had to be conciliatory. He has not had to include lots of different voices in the decision making. As a leader of a coalition, he'll have no choice but to do that.
Well, that's what I was thinking about, because in our reporting, it pointed out more than 20 opposition parties formed a united front against Modi, and I think about, okay, united front against one, but then you have to take those groups, right, and figure out the way forward.
Yeah, so now do you make a play for Modi's allies and try to bring them on your side and try to form a coalition with 24, 25 different parties? Or do you sit back and say, no, we're going to be in opposition, we're going to be a strong opposition, we're going to let Modi dig himself into a hole? This is a very crucial decision that has to be taken first. And then the real practical day-to-day difficulties of herding all these cats together. Right. It's one thing when you have a common goal of defeating Modi. It's quite something else. Now, there's a tradition in Indian politics of people switching sides, and often it's suggested that money changes hands, or at least there are inducements. Come over and join my coalition and I'll give you a ministership, or I will give your party some special consideration. A lot of that horse trading takes place in this exact period immediately after the election. We'll see a lot of that. The BJP has a much bigger, it's been in power so long,
right.
It has much larger war chest than the Congress party. So we'll see.
So don't count them out.
Don't count them out. There will be a lot of effort, but the question will be, politicians, first and foremost, will be guided by what they sense is the mood of the people. If the politicians on the sort of opposition side feel like the momentum is against Modi, inducements of money or positions may not be sufficient. They will not want to back, or they will not want to join someone they think is a losing side. Politicians always want to be on the winning side first.
Right.
Bobby, I'm wondering from the perspective of the types of companies that we talk about each and every day. Elon Musk was supposed to go to India recently. Tim Cook makes regular visits there. It's like every big tech CEO, in recent years has had a picture with Modi. Apple's trying to do more in India when it comes to production of its devices. What do these leaders have to be thinking about with a change in government like this?
Well, if there is a change in government, and it's a big if still, dealing with Modi and the BJP was relatively easy because it was one party with one coherent economic message. Coalitions can be harder to deal with because you have different economic ideologies within a coalition. A coalition that includes the far left as well as center parties. The far left may be less accommodating towards foreign investment. But again, I don't expect that to be a serious problem. I think the Indian political spectrum now has moved, the entire spectrum has moved to a place where, with one or two exceptions, there is general acknowledgement that having foreign investment, particularly in areas of technology and in areas where jobs can be created, is a good thing.
Yeah, just at a time when, the world just continues to surprise us. Before you go, we want to ask you, U.S. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller in a briefing earlier saying Israel is ready to implement a ceasefire deal. What does a ceasefire have to have in order to put an end to not just this battle, but this war that has existed for a long
Well,
time.
President Biden has laid out this very ambitious plan of 6 weeks of a temporary truce during which some hostages and some bodies are exchanged from both sides. Then after the 6 weeks, there will be a longer and work towards permanent ceasefire. On paper, this all looks good. The trouble is that his spokesmen say one thing. What we are hearing from Israel and Palestine is completely different. So the Israeli Prime Minister, just in the past 48 hours, came out and said, yeah, I'm not fully on board with that. There are some parts of the Biden announcement, he claimed, that have not yet been revealed. We don't know what those parts are. He's saying that there's no question of a permanent ceasefire until they've destroyed Hamas. So there's still quite a lot of daylight between what we're hearing in Washington and what we're hearing in Jerusalem, and that worries me. There's been too many of these cycles over the last several months where the White House comes out in front of Israel and says, okay, everyone's agreed, and then we go back and find nobody's agreed.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're going to leave it there. Listen, thank you so much. Always appreciate Bobby Ghosh, senior editor, as we said, editor, it feels like, of all things, here at Bloomberg News, and we so appreciate his time. We want to switch gears, watching what's going on in geopolitics, but also watching the climate.
Yeah, because it is getting hotter. Bloomberg News reported today that cities on the front lines of unrelenting high temperatures that are shattering records in 2024. In Thailand, more people have already died from heat this year than in all of 2023. We got with us Bloomberg opinion editor Mark Gongloff. He's a columnist who covers climate change. He's here in the studio. Mark, you write in your column that the record-smashing global heat of the past year has been driven partly by an El Nino weather pattern in the Pacific. The good news is that El Nino is rapidly giving way to the cooler sister, La Nina. Bad news, but good news? Good news, but bad news? Unfortunately, it's the latter.
Yeah, kind of the latter. I mean...
Hold that thought.
Sure.
We're going to come back to you.
Yep.
We are, though, right now going to go to the East Room at the White House and President Biden.
Congress refused to do. Take the necessary steps to secure our border. 4 months ago, after weeks of intense negotiation between my staff and Democrats and Republicans, we came to a clear bipartisan deal. It was the strongest border security agreement in decades. But then, Republicans in Congress, not all, but walked away from it. Why? Because Donald Trump told them to. He told the Republicans, it has been published widely by many of you, that he didn't want to fix the issue, he wanted to use it to attack me. That's what he wanted to do. It was a cynical and an extremely cynical political move, and a complete disservice to the American people who are looking for us to, not to weaponize the border, but to fix it. Today, I'm joined by a bipartisan group of governors, members of Congress, mayors, law enforcement officials, most of whom live and work along the southern border. They know the border is not a political issue to be weaponized. The responsibility we have to share to do something about it. They don't have time for the games played in Washington, and neither do the American people. So today, I'm moving past Republican obstruction and using the executive authorities available to me as president to do what I can on my own to address the border. Frankly, I would have preferred to address this issue through bipartisan legislation because that's the only way to actually get the kind of system we have now that's broken, fixed, to hire more Border Patrol agents, more asylum officers, more judges. But Republicans have left me no choice. Today, I'm announcing actions to bar migrants who cross our southern border unlawfully from receiving asylum. Migrants will be restricted from receiving asylum at our southern border unless they seek it after entering through an established lawful process. And those who seek to come to the United States legally, for example, by making an appointment and coming to a port of entry, asylum will still be available to them, still available. But if an individual chooses not to use our legal pathways, if they choose to come without permission and against the law, they'll be restricted from receiving asylum and staying in the United States. This action will help us gain control of our border, restore order into the process. This ban will remain in place until the number of people trying to enter illegally is reduced to a level that our system can effectively manage. We'll carry out this order consistent with all our responsibilities under international law, every one of them. In addition to this action, we recently made important reforms in our asylum system, more efficient and more secure reforms. The goal is to deliver decisions on asylum as quickly as possible. The quicker decision means that a migrant is less likely to pay a criminal smuggler thousands of dollars to take him on a dangerous journey, knowing that if in fact they move in the wrong direction, they returned around quickly. And 2 weeks ago, the Department of Justice started a new docket in the immigration courts to address cases where people who've recently crossed the border and they make a decision within 6 months rather than 6 years, because that's what happens now. Additionally, the Department of Homeland Security has proposed new rules to allow federal law enforcement to more quickly remove asylum seekers that have criminal convictions and remove them from the United States. My administration has also recently launched new efforts to go after criminal networks that profit from smuggling migrants to our border and incentivize people to give tips to law enforcement, to provide information that brings smugglers to justice. We're also sending additional federal prosecutors to hotspots along the border and prosecute individuals who break our immigration laws. One other critical step that we will be taking, and that has made a huge difference. We continue to work closely with our Mexican neighbors instead of attacking Mexico. And it's worked. We've built a strong partnership of trust between the Mexican President Lopez Obrador, and I'm going to do the same with the Mexican-elect president who I spoke with yesterday. We've chosen to work together with Mexico as an equal partner, and the facts are clear. Due to the arrangements that I've reached with President Obrador, the number of migrants coming and to our shared border unlawfully in recent months has dropped dramatically. But while these steps are important, they're not enough. To truly secure the border, we have to change our laws, and Congress needs to provide the necessary funding to hire 1,500 more border security agents, 100 more immigration judges to help tackle the backlog of cases, more than 2 million of them, 4,300 more asylum officers to make decisions in less than 6 months instead of 6 years, which is what it takes now, and around 100 more high-tech detection machines to significantly increase the ability to screen and stop fentanyl being smuggled into the United States. These investments were one of the primary reasons that the Border Patrol Union endorsed the bipartisan deal in the first place. And these investments are essential, remain essential. As far as I'm concerned, if you're not willing to spend the money to hire more Border Patrol agents, more asylum officers, more judges, more high-tech machinery, you're just not serious about protecting our border. It's as simple as that. I believe that immigration has always been a lifeblood of America. We're constantly renewed by an infusion of people and new talent. The Statue of Liberty is not some relic of American history. It stands for who we are as the United States. So I will never demonize immigrants. I'll never refer to immigrants as poisoning the blood of a country. And further, I'll never separate children from their families at the border. I will not ban people from this country because of their religious beliefs. I will not use the U.S. military to go into neighborhoods all across the country to pull millions of people out of their homes and away from their families, to put detention camps while awaiting deportation, as my predecessor says he will do if he occupies his office again. On my very first day as president, I introduced a comprehensive immigration reform plan to fix our broken system, secure our border, provide a pathway for citizenship for dreamers, and a lot more. And I'm still fighting to get that done. But we must face the simple truth. To protect America as a land that welcomes immigrants, we must first secure the border and secure it now. The simple truth is, there is a worldwide migrant crisis. And if the United States doesn't secure our border, there's no limit to the number of people who may try to come here, because there's no better place on the planet than the United States of America. For those who say the steps I've taken are too strict, I say to you that be patient, and goodwill of American people are wearing thin right now. Doing nothing is not an option. We have to act. We must act consistent with both our law and our values as Americans. I'll take these steps today, not to walk away from who we are as Americans, but to make sure we preserve who we are for future generations to come. Today, I've spoken about what we need to do to secure the border. In the weeks ahead, and I mean the weeks ahead, I'll speak to how we can make our immigration system more fair and more just. Let's fix the problem and stop fighting about it. I'm doing my part. We're doing our part. Congressional Republicans should do their part. Thank you very much.
Politics with the war. What was that? I asked her, is Prime Minister Netanyahu playing politics with the war?
I don't think so. He's trying to work out a serious problem he has. Thank you.
All right, that, of course, is the president there at the White House in the East Room, taking just one question after those comments being asked about a possible truce, if you will. We mentioned that story earlier with our Bobby Ghosh, but again, noting that Mr. Netanyahu having a very serious problem in terms of working that out. Having said that, the president was in the East Room of the White House. He was there to talk about the worldwide migrant crisis and saying that the United States must secure a border, the U.S.-Mexico border, and so an executive order being put into effect, also talking about more money for agents at the border. So again, just really bottom line, I feel like, Tim, is just about the securing of that U.S.-Mexico border.
Yeah, the president said that he preferred bipartisan action, but the GOP left no choice. He also said that the goodwill of the American people now is wearing thin. For more, let's go to Washington, D.C., where we find Balance of Power co-host Joe Matthew from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Joe, give us the context for this speech today, because there was a border deal in place just a few months ago, and that did not come to fruition.
That's true, and some of the elements of this executive order are drawn from that compromise. The idea of shutting down the border after a certain number of illegal crossings came from that compromise that never got a vote in the Senate, despite months and months of very difficult negotiating between Democrats and conservative Republicans, like Senator Langford, who the president mentioned earlier today. Never saw the light of day in the Senate, was considered DOA in the House. So the president says, "You've left me no choice," was his message today. I'll point out, by the way, who was in the East Room for that. New York Governor Kathy Hochul came to Washington for that, and also Tom Suozzi, the newly elected, or re-elected, I guess I should say, Democrat from New York, because this is an issue that he actually managed to harness pretty effectively in his campaign to retake that seat. And it's something that has been a bit of a roadmap for Democrats here. But look, I have to be honest with you both. We've been talking to progressive Democrats and Republicans all day here in Washington, and they're all angry at Joe Biden. He already lost Republicans on this, who say 0 illegal crossings a day. But hearing from Democrats today, Pramila Jayapal, of course, the chair of the Progressive Caucus, comparing this to Trump policies. We heard that from another Democrats, several, in fact, Hispanic Democrats. Sylvia Garcia from Texas, talking about Trump-era policies, likening this to the Muslim ban. Alex Padilla, Senator, Democrat from California, paralleling what he says what the Trump administration tried to do unsuccessfully. So the president is hoping that there is essentially a silent majority in the middle here who like what he had to say today.
Joe, President Biden also saying the goodwill of the American people is wearing thin. It is an election year. So what does this do in terms of actually helping the problem? What does this do in terms of President Biden's chances at the polls in November? How does it potentially change the narrative for him?
Well, I don't know that it does. He's hoping that this will show fewer border crossings. If they get to 2,500, as we've reported, they would essentially shut down the border between ports of entry and not allow people who have illegally crossed to receive asylum. Does this move independents who have associated the border much more, at least enforcement, with Donald Trump? That has yet to be seen. But again, it really has to do with independent voters who haven't already made up their mind, and it's very difficult to pull that group. Whether it works and whether it plays on the campaign trail are kind of two different things right now, as Joe Biden has been learning.
All right. Well, certainly another important development of the day. Joe Matthew, we so appreciate it. He's co-host of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. Be sure to catch him at 5 p.m. Wall Street time right here on Bloomberg. Having said that, we want to go back to another big global issue, to be fair, and that is climate change, Tim.
We've got with us Bloomberg opinion editor Mark Gongloff. He's a columnist who covers climate change. His most recent column, available on the Bloomberg terminal and at Bloomberg.com, is all about El Nino, saying goodbye to El Nino, and also that La Nina won't be much of a relief. Mark's here in our Bloomberg studio. So Mark, for those of us who might not be totally familiar with El Nino and La Nina, the difference between the two, these are two climate phenomena. Explain what is that exactly is at play here?
It's about cold water in the Pacific Ocean, basically. And so when El Nino is happening, it's this oscillating thing that happens, this weather pattern that happens in the Pacific. When El Nino is happening, it blows hot air to the east. And when La Nina is happening, it brings cool air to the east. And so El Nino tends to, and these things, just because they're happening in the Eastern Pacific, they have effects. They move the jet stream up and down, and so they have effects across the globe. They affect monsoons in India, the temperature in winters in Europe, and especially they have a big impact on the U.S. And what El Nino tends to do is drive global temperatures up. And that's exactly what we've seen. One of the big reasons we've had record high heat every month for the past 12 months. The oceans are, I don't want to say boiling is maybe saying a bit much, but they're really, really hot. We've seen all these droughts and floods everywhere. El Nino has had a lot to do with that.
Well, you always talk about baselines for different things in our world. And, if your baseline in terms of the ocean air, or the ocean rather, is warmer, right? That impacts El Nino, La Nina.
It affects the effects that they have, and so
exacerbates
them, worsens them. And so especially with El Nino, so we had a bad El Nino in 2015, 2016, same deal. Coral reefs died off, oceans got hot, we had record high temperatures. This El Nino wasn't as bad as that El Nino or as strong, but the effects were much worse because just over the past 8 years or so, the Earth has heated up a little bit more. So we've heated up by the background sort of temperature increases about 1.3 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial averages, and so that makes everything more impactful.
I mean, that's kind of a big part of the problem, right? That the base just keeps going up and up. So when things happen, it impacts it very differently on our Earth, or we don't even actually kind of know truly what the outcome is, right?
Right.
Do we? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, as things are heating up, we just don't know all the different ways it can play out.
Yeah, because it's a complicated system. It's very hard to model, but some things you can model, and we have been able to predict that the temperatures are going to rise as we keep putting greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so one thing we could do is stop putting the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and at least put the brakes on this.
Okay, done.
Yeah,
Easy peasy.
yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Should be simple. Once we solve the border crisis, we can get to that one. So that's one thing we can do, we can take a lesson from what El Nino has shown us. The Earth's temperature right now is about 1.6 degrees hotter than it was during pre-industrial times. That's the sort of goal we're trying to get the long-term warming to be at, and we're failing hard at that. But this is what we've seen this year is just sort of a sneak preview of what could come next. La Nina comes in, cools things down, and we could have a couple of years where we're not quite as hot, even though this year could be one of the hottest still. But it's never going to get back to where it was before this decade happened, and it's not going to stop the long-term trend of hotter temperatures.
One thing that we also talk about, Mark, is the link between climate change and extreme weather. And I'm wondering what La Nina could do for extreme weather, like hurricanes, for example.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it may cool things off, but it makes hurricanes more likely to happen because it affects wind shear, which is like the difference in temperature as you go up and down in altitude. So it does away with that. And so everybody between the hot ocean waters and the La Nina, we're expecting a very busy Atlantic hurricane season. 25 storms, which would just about use up the whole alphabet, and 7 major storms, which are Category 3 or higher. So that's pretty busy, and unfortunately, those forecasts have been kind of underestimating the number of storms we get over the past few years. And with climate change, with hotter water, you get stronger storms, and so more destructive storms. So these are things that we're just going to have to start to adapt for, especially if we're not going to stop burning the fossil fuels.
Well, speaking of adapting, we've got a new position, chief heat officers. Like, we keep seeing cities popping them up. We've got them in Florida, I think Miami-Dade. We've got them in other places. Athens, Melbourne, Dhaka North in Bangladesh, Freetown in Sierra Leone. It's just interesting to see that I feel like we've now got a new position that it sounds like it's going to be a much more important one going forward.
Yeah.
That cities just need to figure this out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is part of the adaptation we're talking about. The first city to do this, I believe in the U.S., to use public funds for this was Phoenix, Arizona, where we've talked about this before. You know, the death toll keeps rising there because of the heat. They're struggling to get their arms around the problem. They're at least trying to get their arms around the problem, but this is dealing with the effects. And one of the things, unfortunately, that La Nina is going to do is make it warmer and drier in places like Phoenix and Texas and Southern California. So they're going to be dealing with this a lot more this summer.
Hey, Mark, I wanted to take advantage of you being in the studio with us to touch on a little bit of what we just heard from the president, who was speaking about an executive order on border closures. You made the point to us while he was speaking that the border issue is also an issue when it comes to climate change. Can you talk a little bit about climate migration and why this has to be on the radar?
For sure. Climate migration is going to be a huge part of the effects that we see over the coming decades, and it's already happening now. And there's a lot of pressure in Central America. Central America and Mexico, the bottom of North America, have seen some of the highest temperature increases over the past few decades, and they also are suffering. El Nino has subjected them to a lot of drought, a lot of heat. Mexico City, there was a Washington Post report last week that said Mexico City was going to run out of water this month. We were kind of skeptical about that happening, but it is a very serious problem. And when you have a city of 22 million people running out of water, and you have people in Guatemala and El Salvador running out of water, running out of the ability to farm, to support themselves, where are they going to go? They're going to come to us, where we have our own problems, but maybe they seem a little less dire. And so this border issue is only going to get more germane as the years go on.
Seeking existential asylum to some extent, right? Their ability to live. Hey, listen, you always, though, when you're in here, only got about 30 seconds left here. You know, you end the story that you've got out on the terminal. The upside is that humans also have the power to change their impact. I mean, you do remind us that we can do something about this.
It's still in our hands. You know, we just have to make that choice and have the political will to do what we need to do.
Well, it's a relevant statement considering the upcoming elections in the United States and really around the world. Mark, thank you so much. And thanks for hanging around as we had to juggle some of the breaking news today. Mark Ongloff, he's editor of Bloomberg Opinion, covers the climate world, if you will, and climate change right here in our studio.
Hey, let's head on over to Charlie Pellet for an update on the markets and top business stories. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Tim. Big change in the climate on Wall Street right now. We have gone from losses across the board to gains across the board. S&P right now up 10, gain there of 0.2%. The Dow up 189 now, up 0.5%. NASDAQ up 42, higher by 0.3%. The bond market's climbing. The signs of labor market cooling reinforce speculation that the Federal Reserve will be able to cut rates this year. 10-year, 4.33%. The 2-year, 4.76%. Spot gold down 1%, 23.26 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.2%, 73.34 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin closing in on 71,000, right now trading at 70,916. Bitcoin now up by about 2.6%. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 9, up 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, psychedelic stocks in focus today as a panel of FDA advisors are reviewing data for a new drug that's a version of MDMA designed to treat post-traumatic stress disorder, so PTSD, excuse me. The approval of the first PTSD drug in over 20 years will require U.S. regulators to do something that they've never done before, and that is greenlighting the mind-altering and illegal party drug known as ecstasy.
With more, Bloomberg News consumer reporter Tiffany Carey. She's here in the studio. You can read Tiffany's story on the Bloomberg terminal and at bloomberg.com/businessweek. Okay, so Carol said it. The new drug is a version of MDMA. It's also known as ecstasy. What else do we know about who's making it and what it could do for these people with this affliction?
Yeah, I mean, this drug has been researched for quite a while now. It was formerly known as MAPS, and now it's known as Lykos Therapeutics, the company that's bringing it up. And yeah, there's been a lot of excitement over it, and they've just run into a little more controversy as we get closer to the date of people questioning, hey, how do you actually run a clinical trial and have this placebo group, a control group, when you kind of know
it's like
you're
obvious
on the
if
drug.
you've taken ecstasy or not,
right.
I suppose.
Well, I love there's a quote in there about everything about this is unprecedented. This is from the chair of the Council on Research at the American Psychiatric Association, which makes me wonder, so what is going on probably at this panel? What are the main issues? What are the concerns? Who's going to be heard from? What are going to be kind of the voices heard on this?
Well, today the FDA is looking at this and is going to make a vote, which is seen as influential, but it won't be till August that they make a final decision, keep in mind. But the things that have come up so far are everything from, are these people being maybe unduly sort of influenced by the therapists? Because don't forget, this isn't just MDMA. It comes with psychedelic-assisted talk therapy of a kind we've never seen before.
Right.
And there are a lot of questions being raised about, were negative events reported as part of the trials? How do we meet that gold standard of review when people know that they're in the placebo group?
Can you talk a little bit about what's at stake here? Because PTSD is debilitating for so many people, and there aren't a lot of treatments out there that have been proven to work.
That's right. Yeah, they say there are 13 million people suffering from PTSD. Veterans are a huge segment of that, and there is so much momentum to try and find a solution for these people. I mean, the statistics about suicides and things are alarming. I think that this is not just something that will affect this particular version of MDMA from Lykos, but this could be sort of a bellwether for the entire psychedelics industry, because it's really the first time the FDA is reviewing something like this.
Yeah, it's just, it's something, it's not like any other drug, is it? And that's part of the problem. Or is it because of the way you have to administer it and monitor it? In someone who's what is?
I think it's the psychedelic-assisted therapy part of it that's really new here. We've seen versions of ketamine and other things come on that, there is some obviously hallucinatory effect, other things that go with it. But here, there's a very rigorous course of therapy, just hours of therapy that goes with it. And so the FDA not only has to parse what is the effect of the drug in the clinical trials, but what was the effect of the therapy. And as you can imagine, those things are quite difficult to separate.
What happens if it doesn't get approved?
That is a really interesting question. I think there are a lot of companies right now that are working on molecules that are similar to the classic psychedelics, but without the hallucinogenic effects. And so my guess would be, there's sort of go back to the drawing board, look at some of these analogs, as they call them, of the psychedelic molecules, and also just try to have more rigorous clinical trials if it's found that, it's not the drug that's the problem per se, but maybe the way the trials were done. I think that's some of the questions that are swirling right now.
But do you lose some of the impact of it and the effectiveness, the efficacy of the drug by taking that component away? We've had lots of discussions around this table, whether it's different types of addictions, right? And I think people are understanding increasingly, or PTSD, that, the forms of treatment that exist today just don't do it for a lot of people who then don't get to have kind of a quote-unquote normal life, right? Or a full life, perhaps. So you do wonder, does it have to be something dramatically different?
Yeah, that's the very question they're trying to look at. If you don't have this sort of ecstatic experience and a sort of trip, if you separate the trip from the drug, is the drug still effective? It's really fascinating.
You mentioned ketamine treatments, and this is a area that you've been covering for years at this point, Tiffany, and everyone should subscribe to your newsletter, I should note. But I'm wondering about the idea of what other afflictions people could have when it comes to these types of treatments. Like, where else could they go at? Like, what could these treatments go after?
Oh, what other sorts of indications?
You've talked about ketamine. You've talked about PTSD. I guess indications.
There's a lot of companies are looking at what's called treatment-resistant depression as a first thrust, because it's depression that hasn't responded to SSRIs or other drugs. We see everything from anorexia to cluster headaches. Psilocybin is also something that's being really heavily researched right now. There are other substances like ayahuasca, ibogaine. There's a lot of research into all these sort of psychedelic type molecules right now.
It's so hot. It is so hot right now. It's like this is an area where you have people working, not just publicly traded companies, but you have people working on startups on this. You have a lot of money from investors going into this. Like, people see a lot of promise here.
But I feel like we've been talking about it for some time.
Well, in fact, it looks like if you look at the inflow of money into the sector, we saw a peak in about 2022, and the VC funds have not been flowing as they used to. I think there's more skepticism now, and I think like all biotech stocks, these companies can really make it big, or they can just fade off without the proper money to get the trials
through. Is it cyclical, or is it a question of like low interest rate environment, going after these ideas?
I think it may be something macro, but I think there is also a little more hesitancy about, okay, these things have been in the pipeline for a while and we have yet to see that big breakthrough, which is why there's so much riding on this current trial.
Your story and reporting ends up with, even if Lykos's MDMA gets the green light from regulators, it will only be the first of many hurdles. DEA will have to move MDMA to a less restrictive category of controlled substances. Administering it will require special training for therapists, and after the many hours of prescribed therapy mean it could cost more than $12,000 per patient. So there's a lot to go.
There is a lot to go. We need to see if insurance companies are going to take this on. We need to see if the traditional therapists are interested in providing this to their patients and whether people want it. Maybe some people don't want to take a long psychedelic trip. They're not comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Good point.
A lot of questions.
Also the veteran angle here.
Well, I think about those folks who serve our country and then come back and, they're not recovered and they don't recover for a long time. And so you wonder if there's some hope and something, a new treatment could actually maybe change their course of life. Great stuff. Thank you. Tiffany, glad we could touch on it. We've been wanting to do this story for a while since it hit the Bloomberg. Tiffany Carey, consumer reporter at Bloomberg News, joining us here right in our studio. Coming up, we're going to get to the Wall Street Bank that's increasing time, Tim. It's apparently for new parents.
It's all about that war for talent. You got to compete with your competitors when it comes to offering those benefits from HR. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 2:53 on Wall Street. Axos Financial, which has lent to properties including former President Trump's flagship New York Tower, is plunging after Hindenburg Research said it was short the stock because of the bank's exposure to problematic commercial real estate loans. Right now, we have got shares of the company down by 7%. Citigroup is increasing the time off allowance for new parents in the U.S. and introducing leave for staff. Citigroup shares today, right now, they are down by 0.9%. Sources tell Bloomberg CoreWeave, which is a closely held cloud computing software provider, has offered to acquire Core Scientific for about $1 billion. Those sources say CoreWeave's all-cash bid for Core Scientific comes as the company seeks to expand its AI data center capacity. Right now, we've got shares of Core Scientific surging by 42.2%. Airbus is negotiating a major sale of A330neo aircraft to China, with talks gaining momentum since President Xi Jinping visited his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron last month. Those sources say the largest Chinese airlines are considering buying more than 100 of the upgraded A330 models. ADRs of Airbus down now by 1.8%. An American is pushing a federal appeals court to overturn a decision invalidating its partnership with JetBlue, saying the ruling would prevent the airline from entering into future joint ventures. And those are our top company stories at this hour. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99 Newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. Narendra Modi vowed to continue as India's prime minister even after his party lost its majority in parliament, claiming victory for his coalition in a post on X, calling it a historical feat. Raghuram Rajan is a professor of finance at Chicago Booth School of Business and the former head of the Central Bank of India.
It's actually a win for democracy, and that's good for India, because what democracy does is it allows the different parts to essentially express themselves and to negotiate.
Raghuram Rajan is with the Chicago Booth School of Business. President Biden unveiling a series of measures to curb asylum claims, heading off a surge of border crossings this summer. These moves will shutter the southern border to some asylum claims until the level of crossings substantially fall. Progressives call the moves draconian. Republicans say it's too little too late. Hamas has followed Israel in balking at President Biden's efforts to end the war in Gaza. A Hamas spokesman says that Israel must commit to a permanent ceasefire and full withdrawal from Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has already said Hamas must be destroyed before the war is ended. But today, the State Department indicated that Israel may now be ready to move forward on a deal. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. Now back to Bloomberg's Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Amy Morris in our D.C. bureau. All right, having said that, this story is among our most read on the Bloomberg terminal at this hour. Not the most, but among the most read over the past 8 hours. And this has to do with parental leave. It's going on at Citigroup, and they are increasing the time off allowance for new parents in the United States, and also introducing leave for staff to care for ailing family members, bringing it more in line with Wall Street rivals as they fight to attract and retain talent, as you said.
Okay, let's give the numbers here. So there's an extended policy now. All new parents in the U.S. and Puerto Rico will receive 16 weeks of paid leave, including those who adopted or had children through surrogacy. This is according to an internal memo seen by Bloomberg News. Birth parents are going to get an additional paid recovery time of as much as 8 weeks, so that reaches a potential total of 24 weeks.
Can I just say, first of all, go to the Bloomberg or go to Bloomberg.com. There's a great chart that kind of like ranks everybody. And basically, Citi's getting up to what JP Morgan's been doing, B of A, Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley. Goldman is 20 weeks paid for the primary caregiver and then 20 weeks for the secondary caregiver.
I think there's an outlier, though, on this, and it's Wells Fargo for the secondary caregiver. So paid leave for primary caregiver at Wells Fargo is 16 weeks, but it's only 4 weeks for secondary caregiver. You've got Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Bank of America all with either 16 or 20 weeks of paid leave for secondary caregiver. I wouldn't be surprised if I saw Wells Fargo make a change, given that pretty much everyone else is on board.
Yeah, it's kind of stark and harsh when
if you look at the chart.
You put a chart and you're like, black and white, folks.
One of these things does not belong, right?
Yeah, so
one of these things is not like the other.
Stay tuned to see whether that changes. What
I do think a big part of the story too is the paid caregiver leave for folks who have a family member who's seriously ill and incapable of self-care.
Yeah, been there. I am very grateful for this company that I work for, because I've had to do that several times in my life, and it's great to have that support when you need to do that. So that is something that's just kind of a reality of life, and we are increasingly facing that, especially as we talk about people living longer, and in our family life, we're going to have to think about how we help take care of them. All right, for those who are watching on television, the close is coming up next. Tim, though, and I, we're going to continue on Bloomberg Business Week.
Yeah, we got a great program. Is it the end of short sellers? The business of betting on stock declines is shrinking. Bearish investors are facing threats, Carol, on all sides.
And then we've got founder and former CEO of Yum Brands stopping by to share his secrets to success, how he started out. You will be probably shocked. And then where he ended up. It's a big story. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
Yeah, I feel like there's a little bit of a pattern here. We have been down for most of the day, but we have seen stocks rally. We're just kind of rolling over a little bit, but near our best levels of the session. But this on a day where another piece of economic data kind of rethinking certainly what happens when it comes to rates. Welcome back, everybody. It's Bloomberg Business Week. We are on YouTube, Bloomberg Radio, and of course on Bloomberg Originals. Carol Masser along with Tim Stenivek.
Yeah, that piece of economic data that you're talking about is the JOLTS job opening data. We got 8.05 million jobs and the open jobs, surpassing expectations from economists surveyed by Bloomberg, so coming in below expectations. Big deal.
Interesting. We've seen bonds rally, yields back off. You're looking at a 10-year at 433 right now, so we've seen some moves. So we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about the trade. We're also going to ask the question, because this is among our most read stories on the Bloomberg, is it the end of short sellers? The business of betting on stock declines shrinking as bearish investors face threats on all sides. This story, Jim Chanos, who'd have thunk? We're going to get into it.
Also, the latest when it comes to the chip wars, this time Intel taking aim at NVIDIA in the fight for AI chip dominance. The question, do they have a chance?
Yeah, this is a great question, man. How the mighty have fallen. The founder and former CEO of Yum Brands stopping by to share his secret to success. Where he started will probably shock a lot of people.
And we're joined by the president of UNL. It's the charity started 25 years ago by superstar Usher and his mom. All that and more over the next...
Usher will be singing a song. No, he won't be.
Carol.
Maybe he'll just come by.
Maybe, but he's not on the schedule.
You know.
Yeah, next time.
Maybe we're keeping it quiet. The security is kind of tight around this one. All right, let's get a check on the trade. Our own Usher in residence. We have Charlie Pellet tracking the trade in your top business stories. Take it away, Charlie.
All right, I thank you very much. We have got a lot of green on the screen right here with just about 59 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, all advancing. Russell 2000 in the red. We begin there. Russell 2000 down 1.1%. Small caps lower. S&P little changed, up 3 right now, higher by about 0.1%. The Dow close to session highs, up 120, up by about 0.3%. NASDAQ also little change, but in the green, up by 5 points now. 10-year 4.33%. The 2-year 4.77%. Gold is down 1.1%, spot at 23.27, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.2%, 73.35 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin could not ignore the move there, up 2.2%, 70,613 right now on Bitcoin. Wall Street is looking ahead to Friday's jobs report for clues as to what it means for the next Fed rate move. Kelsey Barrow is Executive Director for Fixed Income at J.P. Morgan Investment Management.
We're watching that labor market rebalancing, but I think the next move that the Fed is going to make is ultimately going to be one that protects the strength of the labor market rather than one that in which they need to be fighting inflation. We do think that inflation generally is under control. The majority of the inflation overshoot we think is lagged, compositional. It's generally related to housing, and secondarily for CPI, it's auto insurance.
J.P. Morgan's Kelsey Barrow. Cisco Systems plans to invest $1 billion in startups that are working on what it calls quote, secure and reliable artificial intelligence services, part of a push to be a bigger player in AI technology. That word from the Cisco Live conference in Las Vegas. Cisco shares today, they're up 1.9%. Recapping, S&P just turning negative, been that kind of a day. Little change now, moving lower by 3 points. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Do appreciate it. Well, the Treasury trade continues to be front and center in a week chock full of U.S. data, especially reads on the labor market. We talked about the jolts, job openings falling to the lowest level in over 3 years amid a broad slowdown. Those figures spurring a slide in Treasury yields, with Fed swaps pricing in a faster pace of rate cuts this year. For several economists and market observers, the data suggests that wages won't likely cause inflation headwinds.
Everything is awesome. All right, or maybe not. For more on how this is impacting today's trade, we're seeing equities kind of take a leg down again. And some of the equity trends that we are seeing on this Tuesday, I feel like volatility is certainly the watchword. Bloomberg News chief markets correspondent back in our studio, our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, Abigail Doolittle, right here. So, Abigail, down, up, down?
I would agree with you, volatility. And it's a little bit confusing. There's not a lot of rhyme or reason to it. The S&P 500 at the lows down 0.5%. Then moments ago, it had been up maybe about, measure, just a little bit, now down about 0.1%. So really not going anywhere all that fast. The Dow, which has been divergent, we've talked about this a little bit, down over the last few weeks, down by about 5% versus the S&P 500, the NASDAQ closer to their all-time highs, up slightly today. The SOX down 1%. So that's something to talk about. You have NVIDIA a lower, a little bit of a breather there.
Finally, I mean,
it's allowed to breathe. It should breathe, shouldn't it?
Well, okay, before we get to chips and before we get to, again, we're going to be talking about Intel in just a few minutes, but this is why sometimes I just don't know why things are happening, Abigail. If I would have seen...
And actually, I just want to correct myself. NVIDIA is actually up 0.6% now. So that's not that's part of a... Yes,
it was
had been taking a breather.
But it was down 0.8% earlier in the session, so there's been a swing.
Okay, had you said to me this morning, without me looking at the markets, that early in the trade we'd get JOLTS data that came in below estimates, and we saw a cooling of the labor market, and yields would come down, I would have said, well, the obvious equity move would have been higher.
I love you're bringing this up.
That didn't happen today, and I'm like scratching my head.
Wait, did you guys plan this?
No, we didn't plan this.
Come on.
We snuck upstairs on 6 and had
just saying.
Talked about JOLTS.
What's going on here? Okay.
So it's interesting because this happened yesterday too. When when the ISM manufacturing data came out in the morning, we saw stocks come off the highs and then eventually went lower a little bit. And usually the reaction to a less good or a bad number would be for stocks to go higher, because the idea that the Fed is going to cut. For the JOLTS data today, we certainly saw the reaction in yields, and that is the story right now, I would say, overall yields. I mean, we have this 10-year yield down about 25 basis points over the last 4 days. That's pretty incredible, and I know that probably a few weeks ago I was talking about how I could chart-wise technically make the case that we could see yields go significantly higher. Now it looks like there's a good chance we're going to see the 2-year yield go down toward 450 and then sharply higher. That's a lot of zigging and zagging.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of volatility in these markets. And at the end of the day, I think that the biggest narrative change right now, it hasn't quite happened yet, but everybody assumed that there wasn't a recession, the economy was fine. I think now we're seeing enough mixed data points between retailers.
Softness, right? Softness.
Yeah, to wonder, what is this going to mean?
I always love volume. I'm always
I'm on it right now. I'm looking at that screen.
What have we seen on up days versus down days right now?
So I actually, let me see if I can answer that question well. What I can answer right now is that we have the S&P 500 volume up ever so slightly. Earlier, it had been down by about 8%.
Okay.
So we have some of the buyers coming out. Let me just take a look at another chart here to answer the question you asked, which is...
Well, go ahead.
Well, just in terms of, because I think what you're trying to get at are buyers more serious than sellers. What I can say is last week on that big day where there was a lot of movement to the upside and the downside, and ultimately closing higher after some downside, the volume was higher. So I think that this just continues to point to uncertainty. And something that I would continue to say, although as I look at the S&P 500 chart, it looks a little bit like this. This year, there's a bit of a range in the year. So that's why it never feels as though, you know, from November to the end of March, it was basically straight higher. There was like little bits of consolidation. But if you go back to February and then up, down, that's why there's this sort of unsatisfying feeling of what's going on. And right now, making it worse, the moves are small, so it's just sort of like,
Yeah.
Okay, now we can talk about the stocks.
The stocks, okay,
Yeah,
sure.
because even though NVIDIA is not taking a breather,
it is moving 1%.
it is moving.
To the downside.
How are you watching? How are you watching the stocks and what's going on with chips? We're going to be talking about chips in just a moment.
So I guess something that I'm thinking about is we did finally see the stocks put in an all-time high to catch up to the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ, but we now have that chip index coming off of its high, and that high is sort of like this pointy little creature on top of the chart, suggesting that the people who bought up there didn't feel great about it, and that there's a good chance it looks a little bit heavy here, as it did.
It's like a touch and go, right?
Yeah, I would say that there's much more likelihood that the SOX is going to come in and probably even go below its 100-day move. So, you know, that we're going to see probably I'm just trying to measure it right now, a 5% correction. I mean, here's a fun fact. From the all-time high in March to the low in April, it was almost a bear market.
Right.
And where did that come out of? So I think we're about to see something similar off of the last all-time high.
That kind of stuck with me when we were seeing the broader market hit records.
Yes.
You kept saying, but wait, look at something like the SOX, right? It still hadn't gone back to that March high level.
Yes.
So we hit it, but we've kind of backed off
we
of it.
bounced back to, and that was fully NVIDIA.
Okay, I have one more. Can I go there?
You can go wherever you want.
Apple.
We didn't talk about this upstairs.
We did not talk about this upstairs.
I don't believe it, everybody.
Apple is just a few dollars away from a 52-week high.
I love that you're keeping me honest on Apple, just like you did last year. So yes, whoa, good chart. So Apple, I've always thought that it would be fun to have a segment where I didn't, to like chart instantly, kind of like I just did.
It kind of happens when you come on. I love it.
Yeah, it's fun. For me, it's really fun. So this chart's really, really interesting. So there's possibly something that's very rare. It's called a triple top happening here for Apple. So there is the ultimate range in Apple, but it started, unlike for the major indexes, it started last May. And we basically went from, let's call it 167 or so, and then we went up to about 200, then back down to 167, back up, and then back down. And right now, we're super close to that 200 again, as you had mentioned. The question is, are the bulls going to break us out of that range? One reason to think that they will not is the last low was lower than the last low. That tells you those sellers at that moment had more conviction. The tops are about equidistant. It really, there's so much uncertainty. That's what it points to.
All right, WWDC kicks off next week. So
I would be surprised if that would be, they'd have to, that will not be the thing to get this chart going. It's going to be some information out of China.
Good point.
Or even earnings in July. We're not so far away.
Amazing, right? Yeah, like a month or so away.
That's crazy.
Crazy.
Okay.
That's our world, right? We go from earnings to earnings and Fed meeting to Fed meeting. Bloomberg News Chief Markets Correspondent Abigail Doolittle. That is the U.S. trade at this hour, including a look at Apple and some of the trade when it comes to semiconductors.
Okay, so let's go more into semiconductors because headlines continue to come out of the Computex show in Taiwan. Taking the stage today, Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, who talked about the new products he expects will help turn back the tide of share losses to peers, including AI leader NVIDIA.
We look now to have 1 billion transistors on a single chip, and even looking to 1 trillion transistors in a single package by the end of the decade. And unlike what Jensen might have you believe, Moore's Law is alive and well.
Wow, talking smack a little bit, right? Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger at Computex in Taiwan. Gelsinger with that direct shot at NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang's claim that traditional processors like Intel's are running out of steam in the age of artificial intelligence. So let's get to it.
We got Bloomberg senior semiconductor analyst Kunjan Sabani joining us from San Francisco. So is that who's right here, Kunjan? Is Moore's Law alive and well, or is it out the window?
Well, I think it's not as simple. I think you have to look at it segment by segment. I think that comment over there, he was referring more to the data center AI segment. over there, I mean, there is no doubt NVIDIA is the current leader, has almost mid-90s market share. We don't see that significantly changing anytime soon. Yes, Intel is coming out and did announce its new products and some price points, etc. But the key point there was the benchmark comparison was to H100. H200 is already shipping. The Blackwell product will be shipping this year. So NVIDIA continues to out-innovate its peers and itself, especially with this one-year cadence. So at least in the near term, we don't expect significant share change in that specific area.
Kunjan, the Intel story. I mean, can Intel ever be a serious player in the AI space? Will they catch up? How do you think about Intel in the chip space?
Yeah, I mean, I can't predict in the future whether or not, but at this point, the way we see it is Intel is more of a show me, prove me story. So they have to continue and show us, milestone after milestone, success points and proof points to raise the confidence. I mean, look, since Pat has taken over the helm, he committed to the process node, which he has delivered so far. So that's a good positive sign. In certain areas like PCs and in certain areas of server processors, they have shown deceleration of market share loss. They have yet to show proven on an annual basis market share gains, but at least those are the right steps in the right direction that Intel is moving. It's just its peers like NVIDIA are just moving way too fast.
Well, that's what I was going to say. If Intel's taking steps, I mean, NVIDIA is running, running, and it's got existence, and I don't know how you catch up is, I guess, my question, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was the same story if you go back in the early 2000s, right? Intel was running ahead and AMD was trying to catch up. And the same question we used to try to figure out, okay, can AMD catch up? And this is in processors, not in GPUs. The way AMD caught up is a couple of things, right? Intel had some missteps on its own process technology, manufacturing technology, and AMD used to outsource this to TSMC, and TSMC got a little bit better than Intel, and that helped AMD sort of gain an upper leg. So it's either, NVIDIA has some missteps or Intel really needs to accelerate and out-innovate NVIDIA to catch up. But it's very hard.
Kunjan reminding me that just last week, I believe it was, Intel, or I should say NVIDIA post-earnings, adding $150 billion in market cap, which is more than an entire NVIDIA in market cap in a single day.
Yeah, perspective, right? It's pretty remarkable. We have, I think I could say, a loyal listener and watcher emailing me, and he says a stupid question. I don't think it's a stupid question. Why is NVIDIA so far ahead of its peers? Is there a competitor risk to someone else creating the same chip, or, the Chinese stealing it, replicating it? How is it that they are light years away from their peers?
Well, it was not an overnight phenomenon. If you think about it, their leadership is in GPUs. They were almost, I would dare say, inventors of the GPUs. They've been doing this for 20 years, while most of the peers like Intel, AMD, really cut their teeth on the CPU. So now you can say it was a feat of luck, or it was a vision in terms of Jensen, right? Thinking years ahead. But that is what they believed was the future of computing. And just the timing aligned well. And they have been investing in GPUs for the past 15, 20 years, billions of dollars of R&D every year, while everyone else was sort of not putting that as a top priority. So it was not just an overnight accident. And now in semiconductors, typically, and there's many examples, you can take the lead of Qualcomm when it comes to wireless technology, right? You could take the lead of legacy Intel when it came to computing technology. Once a silicon player is many years ahead, it is, in most cases, almost impossible, only in few cases possible, to sort of catch up to them, unless they start sort of, hitting on their own feet.
Right. Great story, good perspective and context. Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Semiconductor Analyst Kujan Sabani joining us. I'm looking at NVIDIA. It's up 134% this year. It's a $2.8 trillion market cap company. Intel down 40%, $128 billion market cap company. Still ahead, everybody. We're going to get to the short sellers who are fearing extinction. This is one of our most read stories on the Bloomberg. That's next.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. It has been a choppy trading session. Right now we have got the S&P 500 index back in the red, down a point, little change, 52.82, a drop of less than 0.1%, just about flat on the day. Dow Industrials, meanwhile, up 78, up 0.2%, while NASDAQ lower by 2 points, down less than 0.1%. 10-year, 4.32%, with a 2-year that's now yielding 4.77%. Spot gold trading lower by 1% now, $23.26 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.2%, $73.32 for a barrel of WTI. A significant move for Bitcoin Bitcoin today, putting it back above 70,000. Bitcoin today up by 2.1%. So the bond market climbed as signs of labor market cooling reinforce speculation that the Fed will be able to cut rates this year. As for the economic backdrop and the outlook for the Federal Reserve, Megan Horniman is Chief Investment Officer at Verdance Capital Advisors.
I think the economy is weakening, but be careful thinking that just because the economy is weakening that the Fed's going to come in and save the day like they have in the past. They've made it very clear that they will sacrifice the economy in order to get inflation to where it needs to be.
Megan Horniman of Verdance Capital Advisors. CrowdStrike Holdings will be a name reporting after the close of trading. Investors will be facing a precarious setup heading into the cybersecurity company's next earnings report as its sky-high valuation faces off with rapidly souring sentiment for software stocks. And again, we'll have those numbers after the close of trading. Recapping stocks trading mixed, S&P down by 1 point. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Okay, Carol, you say this all the time.
I do.
There are two sides to every trade, a buyer and a seller. Investors that are long, those that are short. This all part of normal trading, right?
Right. In a down day, those short sellers might be like, yay, it's actually a win for us.
Doug Krisner always reminds us, you got to look at the shorts.
Two sides to every trade. All right, that brings us to one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg today about the short sellers on Wall Street that are fearing extinction in a relentless stock market rally. Hard to be short thanks to the gravity-defying bull market, lingering regulatory threats, a daily trading horde randomly squeezing shares like GameStop even higher. Remember yesterday? And then a lot more, Tim.
So, right, Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Denitsa Sakova and Bloomberg News equities reporter Carmen Reinecke. They're in the Bloomberg Big Take today. They have the Bloomberg Big Take today. It is one of the most read stories on the terminal. Both join us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Carmen, I want to start with you. You go through names in the piece here who very prominent people. Jim Chanos, we talked to him a few months ago. Carson Block. Andrew Left, still a prominent short seller. What do the numbers actually tell us about what's going on with shorts?
Yeah, so one thing that we're seeing and that we highlight in the piece is that the level of short interest, how many people are actually shorting individual stocks in the U.S. is really at an all-time low. So we're just seeing that this practice overarchingly is not as popular as it used to be. And I mean, this makes sense for all the reasons that you just said. You know, equities keep going up. Some of the people in the piece, including Chanos, said that it's just hard to raise money for the short side of the trade. It's not been as profitable in the last decade, at least, again, sort of big picture. Of course, there are always pockets and there are one-off opportunities that people find, but it's just made it harder to raise money and harder to sort of sell as a strategy.
Well, that's what I thought was interesting. Denise, come on in on this because, I mean, we've had rallies before, we've had bull runs before, and the short sellers still thrive. Is there something more to today's environment?
Yeah, it's just a very difficult game for short sellers. You know, we've had a bull market rally for a very long time, which is obviously has always been a difficult time for short sellers. But we have regulatory pressures. We have governments in China, South Korea, introducing some of those restrictions on short sellers. We have retail traders popping up every few months, squeezing those retail names, which we know 2021 was one of the most difficult year for short sellers, and we saw a lot of closures, we saw a lot of conversions, we saw some short sellers kind of moving into long positions, getting broader baskets, and just trying not to have that very directional single name short exposure. So it's all of these things happening together. There is public scrutiny. So it's just like
how
things
much
are
of
really
that
adding
is like
up.
a big deal? Like I think, you know, if you come, you know, if regulators are kind of like watching what you're doing or you're getting called in, that's gotta like kind of make you a little freaked out as a short seller.
Yeah, I mean, we speak to some of the people who are at the center of the U.S. Department of Justice investigation, and Andrew Left. Obviously, this has been a very tough time for him, and Carson Block was also involved. So some of the anecdotes we spoke to them was just like, you're constantly worried about being sued. It's an expensive business, it's a difficult business, and you're constantly worried about getting sued on top of that.
Well, and the risk, I think, is so much higher. You know, when you are investing long, you can only lose really that initial investment, right? When you're on the short side, the losses could technically be infinite. Like, eventually, you would have to close out at a loss, but they could keep going if that stock goes up, if the borrow fees continue to, you know, climb higher.
Carmen, what would you say to somebody who said, wait a second, we need shorts in the market because it's a way, I don't want to say to keep companies honest, but it's a way to keep companies accountable. These are the folks who go through the balance sheets and the income statements and say, wait a second, we're seeing some accounting issues here. We believe that this company's overstating the value of X. And that's why, like, that's the thesis, this deep research that goes into this stuff. And yes, it moves markets, but some people argue that's an efficient use of information.
Totally. Yeah, I think a lot of short sellers would agree with you. And I've even heard shorts say that, you know, like activist long investors and activist shorts should actually be more hand in hand. They have a lot of the same goals in common, which is transparency of companies, which is, you know, ultimately maybe bettering something that's going on the board or in management or in the practice of a company. So, I mean, I think that this is a debate that's been going on for a long time, whether short sellers, you know, are efficient for the markets. You know, in the U.S., we still have it as a practice. There is still an active group of people that are short selling. There are, as we point out in the piece, there's a little uptick in activist activity and campaigns this year, which is looking, you know, kind of positive for at least one corner of the industry. So I think it's one of those things where, you know, short sellers are always going to sort of be at the center of a discussion. It seems like they're not going to go away anytime soon, even when though things are difficult.
I do think about that. Like, you know, it's kind of, you said maybe not companies do something wrong, but companies do things that are wrong, and you do need kind of a gut check. And it's always been fascinating, I feel like, in the time that I've been covering this, that any time you brought up a short seller, it was like, you got to get the company's comments on the position. You got to be like,
Enron, heard of it?
Exactly. But it's just like everybody gets so nervous about it. But I think it's an important gut check potentially on the markets. Having said that, Carmen, I want to ask you, Jim Chanos. I've always loved over the years talking to him, conversations. There's smart, thought out arguments. I mean, these are often the serious short sellers have done typically their research. There's fundamental reasons why they think, okay, wait, there's a problem to this story.
Oh, totally. I mean, so many of these short sellers, too, they're really doing like very, very intense investigations and research on these companies. So I think it makes it even more sort of important that someone like Chanos would say, I'm stepping away from this practice, that I'm not seeing the benefit of it. I'm not getting the returns that I want. And, you know, especially, you know, someone as prolific as him.
Hey, Denitza, come on in here, because one thing that we haven't talked about at length yet is the effect of the retail army.
Yeah,
the GameStop folks, the AMC folks.
We've been talking about this a lot.
We have over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
We had an author on last week who has a new book coming out, The Troll Army, Nathaniel Popper. And then, of course, what happened yesterday and over the weekend with GameStop. So how does that play into this?
For sure. I just want to add the one thing on the point of Jim Chanos. It's very interesting that he cannot raise capital.
Yeah.
So there are many new entrants. That's part of the story. But people just cannot raise that institutional capital that was the case before. So it's hard to see endowments and pension funds really allocating to those strategies.
Yeah.
Whether that's
Had
the
they
public's
significantly before?
Yeah. So we have a stat of how much the AUM of the industry has fallen, and now it's down to 5 billion, and the number of hedge fund constituents is just 14.
When was it? What's the peak?
The peak was 2008.
And that was how much?
2009. It was 6 billion in terms of assets. But at the same time,
from 6 to 5?
From 6 to 4. But at the same time, the hedge fund industry more broadly has tripled. So pretty much every other sector has really rapidly increased, while short selling is one of the few places that has gotten smaller and smaller. But yeah, on the retail traders, definitely that has been a big problem for short sellers. And we just wrote about Andrew Left shorting GameStop again. But that has been a painful bet for him the last time.
Yeah.
It may be a painful bet again, but it seems like for short sellers, retail traders are like a big force in markets that they really don't understand, but are really against everything they stand for, and they still find ways to bet against it. But it's been painful. And going back to that short from Andrew Left, he said, I'm taking smaller positions. And just if you look at the broader short interest in AMC and GameStop, it's much smaller than what we saw in 2021. So even if some names are daring to say I'm short, more broadly, investors are staying away from those names and are scared to be short squeezed.
Carmen, bottom line, 30 seconds, short sellers not going away completely,
but just facing a completely new set of obstacles.
All right, so not totally going away, but it's definitely a different environment. A fascinating piece, as we said, among the most read on the Bloomberg terminal. Some really cool reporting by both of you, so appreciate it. Denise Tsakova, she's cross-asset reporter at Bloomberg News, here in our interactive broker studio, along with Carmen Reinecke, equities reporter at Bloomberg News. I do highly recommend you check it out on the Bloomberg terminal and at Bloomberg.com.
It's the big take among the most read stories on the Bloomberg terminal. Well, the S&P 500 right now, Carol, doing a whole lot of nothing.
Bouncing around.
It's in the red. The NASDAQ composite about the same. The Dow, though, up 0.2%.
Yeah, this on a day where we have seen a fair amount of volatility. As we said, we're just about a week away from the next Fed meeting, so something we're thinking about. Hey, coming up next, though, we are going to count you down to the close on this Tuesday. But first up, a check on world and national news. We do that with Amy Morris. She's in D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Carol. President Biden unveiled a series of measures to curb asylum claims, heading off a surge of border crossings this summer.
Today, I'm announcing actions to bar migrants who cross our southern border unlawfully from receiving asylum. Migrants will be restricted from receiving asylum at our southern border unless they seek it after entering through an established lawful process.
The moves will shutter the southern border to some asylum claims until the level of crossings substantially fall. The order also raises the threshold for people to stay in the U.S. Progressives call the moves draconian. Republicans say it's too little too late. Hamas has followed Israel in balking at President Biden's efforts to end their war in Gaza, with both sides saying their conflicting conditions for a permanent ceasefire must be met before they'll agree to even pause fighting. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller, however, says Israel may be ready to move forward.
The proposal on the table is nearly identical to what Hamas said it would accept just a few weeks ago. Israel has said it is ready to implement it. It is time to finalize this agreement, put an end to the violence, and to build a better future for both Palestinians and Israelis alike.
Hamas spokesman says Israel must commit to a permanent ceasefire and full withdrawal from Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Hamas must be destroyed before the war can end. 5 states are holding primaries today. Voters going to the polls in Iowa, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, South Dakota, and in New Jersey. Congressman Andy Kim is expected to beat embattled Senator Bob Menendez for the Democratic nomination for Senate. Menendez is facing trial on federal bribery charges. And after today's contests, President Biden will be poised to officially accept the nomination that he unofficially clinched on March 12th. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. It has been a very choppy session. We got the Dow higher, S&P struggling to find direction, lower right now. NASDAQ as well, also lower. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Hello. Bill Maloney. All right, we do not have Bill Maloney right now, so let me pick it up. Here's what's going on. The Dow higher, as I mentioned, by 94 points, up by about 0.3%. S&P 500 index unchanged on the day right now, and we've got NASDAQ down 4, drop there of less than 0.1%. 10-year yield, 4.32%, with a 2-year right now, 4.76%. Gold down 1%, 23.26 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.3%, 73.28 for a barrel of WTI. Big move for Bitcoin right now, holding above 70,252. Bitcoin up now by 1.7%. Coming up after the close of trading, we will be hearing from CrowdStrike and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, among many others. Recapping, S&P unchanged right now. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, TikTok, everyone. Just 18 minutes to go until the close of trading on this Tuesday afternoon. Let's get to our Drive to the Close with Kathy Entwistle, Managing Director at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. She joins us from New Jersey this afternoon. Kathy, how are you?
Hey, I'm well. How are you doing?
We're doing well. Hey, one thing I wanted to talk to you about, thanks to the notes that you sent our producer, Paul Brennan, is the pile of cash on the sidelines in money market funds. We've asked a lot of folks like yourself, what's going to happen to all that cash in the coming months if rates move lower? And I want to know, in your opinion, where that cash is going to go.
Sure, I think that's a great question. And I think if you leave your money in the cash, thinking that you're still going to get these high yield rates, you're incorrect, because as rates start to come down, those rates will come down very quickly as well. So I think where the money will go is a few different places. You think about like your broad portfolio, think about asset allocation. You want to have some of it in, equity, some of it in fixed income, and some of it in alternative type investments. So and a little bit in cash. So the cash has to match up. Like you want to match your investments up with your goals. So short-term goals, emergency funds, you're buying a house, going on vacations, that should stay in short-term money. That can stay in money markets or things like that. Fine. But the bulk of that money needs to go either into equities or fixed income or other types of investments. So fixed income, if you don't start legging your cash into longer term duration portfolios now, it's going to hurt you in the long run. So you have to start, it's hard to say like, I'm going to give up 5% for a slightly smaller yield, but in the long run, it's going to work out much better for you to do so. So part of that has to go into fixed income, into bonds. And I think there's a lot of people who are still probably underallocated into equities based on just some fear factors in the past where they've taken money out and haven't gone back in. And I think that as well. So a little bit of asset allocation across the board.
Kathy, you're going to have to forgive me. All our listeners and viewers are going to have to forgive me because I got some news. Emily Grafeo, Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter, is here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker studios because Carol is off to Tennessee for an event. You'll hear from her a little bit tomorrow, perhaps. But Emily is filling in for her. Emily, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I came in and the S&P 500 turned into negative territory.
It was
so I don't know what that means.
It was bouncing around all day, but I know you have lots of questions.
Yes, I have a lot of macro questions for you, Kathy. Maybe we could start with, you're talking about asset allocation, but what kind of rate cut forecast do you have these asset allocation views that you just laid out? Right now, it looks like the bond market is pricing for 1 or 2 cuts this year. Where are you thinking?
Yeah, we're looking at potentially 2 to 3 cuts, potentially. But again, there's a lot of fear in the market. We're not really sure what the Fed's going to do. There's a lot of different information that keeps coming in that contradicts. So we're a little bit more cautious on those cuts this year. However, even if they come in next year, it's still going to be painful if you're not positioned properly. So if you remember, as the Fed was raising interest rates, they would raise 1/4 point, and the money markets would go up 1/4 point. So don't be confused. When they lower by 1/4 point, you'll see the money markets start to drop. They may drop even more based on anticipation of those cuts coming once we start to see some movement by the Fed. So I think we're all just waiting for that first move. And I think when they start to make that first move, we're going to start to see some changes in the market and more of a perception what's coming down the road and people reacting and investing accordingly.
And what is the expected path then for equities? Because I noticed today we saw a big bond market rally after that JOLTS number, yields coming down, but stocks seem to just shrug off those prospects that perhaps we could get a rate cut sooner. Is the equity market starting to see some exhaustion here? It's not necessarily, bad news is good news anymore?
No, that's a good point. And I would say, too, equity markets have been very resilient, and investors in the equity markets have been resilient over long-term periods of time. I think we've been looking at in the past, valuations, strong cash flows, strong balance sheets, companies that can survive and thrive in any kind of economic situation. And so from that standpoint, if you're investing long-term and you're investing in those companies, you want to think about diversification. You can't have all of your money in technology, right? Because we have different investment risks. And one of them is, sector risk. One of them is reinvestment risk, interest rate risk. So we've got all these different risks out there that we have to think about when we're thinking about our portfolios. And that's why it's so simple, but asset allocation, diversification are 2 main components you should be considering when investing in a portfolio.
What's your highest conviction place to add new money right now for your clients that I think you said are mostly high net worth?
Yeah, most of our clients are high net worth. And at the end of the day, no matter how much money you have, if you are a long-term investor and you're going to start looking at adding, you can add at any time. There's no bad time to start investing. You just don't want to put it all in on one day. So if you're investing in the equity markets, yeah, the valuations are maybe a little bit loftier than they have been in the past. We've had a big run up in the market. We might see a little bit of sideways, back and forth, bumping around a little bit until the Fed makes a decisive move, until we see, some certain numbers that come down that are more favorable for moving forward with the economy. And don't forget, recession is a lagging number. So we're really not going to know exactly what's happened these last 6+ months or the next 3 months until next year. And then we'll be talking about, we were in the recession or we had the soft landing or whatever it may be. But just start putting money in now, because if you're investing for 5-10 years, you can dollar cost average when we have big dips in the market, make it a buying opportunity. Otherwise, just keep it slow and steady and have a plan like X% a month or X% every other week. That's what we do with our clients, and it seems to work out pretty well.
Kathy, we love it when you join us. Thank you so much for taking the time today. That's Kathy Entwistle, Managing Director at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management, joining us from New Jersey. Taking a look at the markets, Emily, you're right. We do see the S&P 500 now higher by 0.1%.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, kind of doing nothing today, moving between gains and losses. The Dow up 0.3%, the NASDAQ up 0.1%.
Yeah, I wonder if there's just a little bit of exhaustion. We've seen such a big rally in the S&P 500 over the last several weeks, and so it's interesting to watch that cross-action move.
Yeah, I would have thought that, and I'll say this a little later too, and I said this earlier to Abigail, I would have thought that with the JOLTS numbers coming in today, so far below expectations, that we would have seen, and bond yields coming in, we would have seen more of a rally today.
Yeah, exactly.
But we just didn't see that.
And that JOLTS number, it was the lowest level in over 3 years.
Yeah.
U.S. job openings fell to the lowest in over 3 years. You would have thought you'd see more of a pop.
Yeah, no, that's
and
why
small caps really getting crushed.
That's why I talk about this stuff. I'm not actually deploying money.
Exactly.
Because who knows what the reaction is going to be. All right, that is our drive to the close. A big thanks to Kathy Entwistle, Managing Director over at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. Coming up, it's Beyond the Bell, our cross-platform coverage of the market close with our friends at Bloomberg TV. This is Business Week.
Company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Coming up after the close of trading, earnings out of CrowdStrike and HPE, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Shares of both companies are trading lower right now. We do have CrowdStrike down by just about 0.8%. HPE lower now by 1.7%. But we did have a trading halt for Axos Financial, stock once again moving. Axos is the company that has lent properties, including former President Trump's flagship New York Tower, lower today after Hindenburg Research said it was short the stock because of the bank's exposure to problematic commercial real estate loans. Axos trading lower now by 5.1%. It will take as long as it takes to turn around quality control issues at Boeing. That's according to CEO Dave Calhoun, as the plane maker continues to work to regain customer and investor confidence after this year's door plug blowout on a 737 MAX. Calhoun says safety issues took a hit as COVID forced factory workers to do more with less. He spoke with our Guy Johnson.
While it was not the specific cause to Alaska, in my view, it was the systemic cause. It was the issue that created the opportunity, a little bad behavior without a doubt on the part of somebody who we don't know yet, but it created an opportunity in the last position of a factory to then allow for an escape, which we are not allowed to do and never will be allowed to do.
Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun spoke with Bloomberg's Guy Johnson at a moderated discussion at the Berlin Aviation Summit. You can catch the full conversation on the Bloomberg Talks podcast. And those are our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellet. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Tim Stenivek and Emily Grafeo in for Carol Massar this afternoon. Thank you very much, Emily Grafeo, because you have a new story out.
I do.
Along with Katie Greifeld.
Yes.
About ETFs.
Yes.
And what's going on with Fidelity.
It's about the relationship between ETF issuers, so
Okay.
the companies that issue the ETFs, and Fidelity's trading platform where retail and RIA investors can go and buy the products. So a couple months ago, Katie and I broke the news that Fidelity was telling a select number of ETF firms that their end investor would have to pay a $100, up to $100 trading charge if the ETF firms didn't sign basically what we call a revenue sharing agreement, so pay Fidelity some portion of their fund revenue. So they were doing a little bit of a kind of negotiation tactic, and it sparked a lot of industry backlash on Twitter. People were like, oh my gosh, $100 for a trading charge. All of those firms have now negotiated with Fidelity to avoid that. But the story today that Katie and I have out is about how now Fidelity is approaching a broader group of ETF issuers and asking them, you got to pay up or you're going to have some type of new charge.
Is this the cost of commission-free trading and low-fee index funds?
Yeah, I mean, they slashed trading fees in 2019. And along with that, we've also seen outflows from mutual funds and more inflows into ETFs. And ETFs are cheaper. So
I mean, they're like, we're talking, 3 basis points for exposure to the entire stock market.
yeah, exactly. And a mutual fund, sometimes it's 1%, 1.2%. In the mutual fund fee is actually a fee that's the fund issuer has expected to go and pay Fidelity. So it's typical that a mutual fund issuer would pay a fee, but it's not as commonplace in the ETF world.
So right now it's just Fidelity that you're reporting on, but any chance that we see, Schwab and other companies do stuff like this?
That's the big question. We'll have to see if Schwab follows suit. Everyone's wondering that. I think the most interesting part of the negotiations is now they've said, if you don't pay, they'll hide your fund in their search platform. So go read that story and see all their negotiation tactics.
Check out this story and more on the Bloomberg Terminal. It's by Emily Grafeo and Katie Greifeld. Coming up next, we're joined by our Bloomberg TV team for our cross-platform coverage on radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. Counting you down to the close, Bloomberg's Beyond the Bell starts right now.
Sit tight. Full market coverage coming up right here as we take you to the bell and beyond.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Scarlett Fu. We're counting you down to the closing bell, and here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast. We're joined right now by Tim Stenivek, Emily Grafeo in today for vacationing. Carol Massar. Welcome to our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms, television, radio, and our partnership with you two, Tim. Stocks still kind of a mixed bag as they have been since hitting those record highs just about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, the S&P 500 kind of searching for direction today. We did see some kind of clear moves early in the session, but it moved between gains and losses about a dozen times so far today, Emily Grafeo. So up about 0.1% right now, but no clear movement.
Yeah, and Tim, we were just talking about earlier how stocks didn't really move that much on that jobs report or the JOLTS report, but the bond market really seemed to like it, but stocks really shrugging it off, Scarlett.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that bad economic news was seen as bad news for the stock market. And this is definitely a change from, say, 2 weeks ago when the S&P 500 is at its record high and everyone was saying, oh, the bad news is great. It means the Fed's going to move soon.
Yeah, absolutely here. And it gets to the question is when do we get that clarity? We were speaking with Ryan Williams, the founder of Cadre, about commercial real estate. And he really talked about this idea, at least from a real estate perspective. That's really what the investors there are looking for, is for the Fed to finally provide some clarity. And maybe that's also what investors in other asset classes are looking for as well.
Do you think we'll see that clarity next Wednesday?
No, not at all.
No? You don't?
No.
The countdown is on.
No, and here's the thing. It's not the Fed's fault because the Fed, I think Jay Powell will be as clear as he can be, but the market will, of course, interpret it in some janky way, and then we'll just sort of rinse and repeat for the next few months.
Is that a technical term?
I'm trademarked.
Okay.
We get the closing bells here in New York. This is where people clap and cheer for a job well done. A mixed bag, though, in the markets here on the day. You do have some green across the screen with the Dow Jones Industrial Average going to finish the day higher by roughly 140 points or about 0.4%. The S&P 500 up about 8 points or 0.1%. The NASDAQ composite is higher by 28 points or 0.2%. But here are your decliners on the day. You can find that in the cyclical and small cap space. Dow Transport's down 0.9%. S&P 400 mid caps down 1.3%, and the Russell 2000 guys down 1.3% on the day.
That Russell 2000 really taking it on the chin today. Much bigger movement than we saw in the S&P, the NASDAQ, and the Dow. Speaking of the S&P, kind of an even split between gainers and decliners in the S&P 500, Scarlett. 230 did move higher, 273 stocks moved lower.
And that's pretty much reflected in the sector performances as well. Let's take a look at the IMAP, which shows you how the different sectors performed. And the reason why there's so much more green on that screen is because tech finished up 0.4% for the third best performance. Real estate investment trusts and staples were the best performers. And
yeah, give us some love, Scarlett.
Right. Well, as
It's
you
sexy.
mentioned, Romaine, REITs were the best performers over the past 5 days as well. Your weaknesses, your weak spots are materials, energy, and financials, with materials down about 1.2%.
Okay, I got the gainers today because Carol's out, so I get to do the stocks that moved higher.
Wow.
I do want to start with Tellurian.
Do you sit in her chair too when she's gone?
No. Emily gets that today. Tellurian shares finishing the day higher by 17%. This after Bloomberg reported earlier that the company is in discussion with Saudi Aramco and Woodside Energy Group to invest in its liquefied natural gas export project in Louisiana. Tellurian has reviewed various equity investment offerings from the energy companies related to its plant, said the people who asked not to be named, as they are not authorized to speak to the media. Shares higher today by 17.1%. And shares of cruise operators surged today. I want to pick one out specifically. Carnival Corporation shares moved higher today by more than 5%. We did get some news late yesterday that the company is going to sunset P&O Cruises Australia and fold Australia operations into its Carnival Cruise Line operations. So Melius Research came out with a note today that said that Carnival's decision to consolidate its P&O Cruises Australia brand is, quote, hugely symbolic of the change underway. From CEO Josh Weinstein. Cunningham over at Melius Research also says that this could be the catalyst to start a rally. You also had Peel Hunt upgrade its recommendation to buy, noting that the company will appeal to more investors as it accelerates its debt for equity swap. And then a little M&A news coming at you for my final gainer today. Core Scientific, ticker CORZ, just surging today, finishing higher by more than 40%. This after the company, well, I should say Bloomberg reported that CoreWeave has offered to acquire Core Scientific, the Bitcoin mining company, for about $1 billion, this according to a person with knowledge of the matter. CoreWeave's all-cash bid of $5.75 was made on Monday and comes as the company seeks to expand its AI data center capacity, this according to
CoreWeave and Core Scientific, what's the name going to be when they combine?
The cores. Oh. Yeah, they got to go.
Double core.
Yeah, that one I had to read very closely to make sure I got the cores correctly.
Yeah, and I'm still not sure you did, but we'll go with it.
All right.
Wasn't there a band called the Core?
Potentially buying Core.
All right, let's take a look at the decliners in for Carol today. I'm looking at Freeport McMoran. That was down as much as 6%, falling alongside the broader materials and energy stocks amid a drop in global commodity prices today. We saw copper falling below 10,000 as inventories are rising. Earlier, Bloomberg had reported that stockpiles on the Shanghai Futures Exchange climbed to the highest level since 2020. But of course, we also saw copper top a record high just a few weeks ago at around 11,000. So 10,000 here, not too bad for copper, but dragging down Freeport McMoran today, a mining company. I'm also looking at two retailers. DBI, this is the owner of Designer Brands, Designer Shoe Warehouse. Romaine, I know you love that store.
I went in there once, and it scared me.
Yeah, there's a lot of shoes in there.
A lot. And they're just like spread out on the floor. What's that about?
They're all over the place. You have to
Easy
hunt.
access.
You have to hunt and peck. Anyway, the stock was down as much as 22%, biggest drop since March, and the earnings were all around bad. It was a miss on adjusted EPS and comp sales, the latter being down 2.5% versus analysts estimating a gain of about 0.6%. The CEO, Doug Ho, did say, "We believe that we're on solid footing as we enter the summer months and are pleased to reaffirm our guidance for 2024, but that was not enough to lift the stock again, down as much as 22%, down about 20% at the close. And lastly, one more retailer, Bath & Body Works, saw its biggest drop since April 2020 after another earnings miss. Net sales were down 2%, and it sees net sales down 2% to flat in the second quarter.
Yeah.
Analysts saying that this is going to likely lead to a worsening in sales growth and earnings growth.
All right, well, we still have earnings, believe it or not, here. CrowdStrike crossing the wire. So too is HP Enterprise here. Their 2Q numbers, this is the fiscal quarter here. Revenue coming in, looks like a big beat, $7.2 million. The street was looking for $6.8. Adjusted EPS beat as well, 42 cents versus what the street was looking for at about 39 cents a share here. The company's guidance for the fiscal third quarter, it sees net revenue at $7.4 to $7.8 billion. The low end of that range is right around the average of analyst estimates. EPS, their guidance for the third quarter, 43 cents to 48 cents. The street on average was looking for 46 cents a share, and the company guys saying that they still see their full year free cash flow at least $1.9 billion. The street looking for roughly about $2 billion.
Okay, so shares of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise up about 8%. We're seeing a different move, the complete opposite, coming from CrowdStrike. The company did report first quarter revenue that beat estimates, but shares down 7.4% right now. For fiscal year revenue coming in between $3.98 billion to $4.01 billion. That's above estimates. Second quarter revenue coming in, or estimate coming in at $958.3 million to $961.2 million. Estimates were for $954.6 million. Again, first quarter revenue beating estimates, but the company is down by about 6% in the after hours.
Yeah, I'm looking at CrowdStrike. Part of it is because people were expecting the company to have a beat and raise quarter, and the big question here is its annual recurring revenue and how that plays out. Going back to Hewlett-Packard Enterprise for a moment here, I just looked at the company statement from Antonio Neri, the president and CEO. He has 2 paragraphs, and he mentions the words or the acronym AI 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times.
That's it?
Yeah, that's quite a bit. But the headline here for them is that AI systems revenue more than doubled from the prior quarter.
Yeah.
And, you know, obviously this is where they see the growth coming from.
Well, this is curious, too, because, I mean, we talk a lot here about how some of the companies that are supposed to be benefiting from AI haven't necessarily shown that in earnings. We saw that, of course, with Dell. We saw that with some of the software companies last week here. So at least in this one particular earnings report out of HP, I guess you could maybe take some encouragement here, at least if you believe this is coming from AI, that at least there's a benefit flowing immediately to investors.
Yeah, they get about 100 basis points of a gain in the post-market for each time they mention AI, Romaine.
Okay, you should use that in your story, Emily.
It's in my drafts.
I do want to just go back to CrowdStrike because it is lower right now. The company's president, CEO, and co-founder George Kurtz coming out and saying that the differentiated architecture has a wide competitive moat and uniquely enables CrowdStrike to solve the industry's biggest cybersecurity, IT, and data problems. Still, not a beat and raise, though, as Scarlett mentioned, investors were expecting. Guys, that is going to do it for our cross-platform coverage. We call it Beyond the Bell here on Bloomberg TV, Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Originals, and pretty much everywhere you can get us, including YouTube as well. We'll be back, though, tomorrow, same time, same place. We'll see you then.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. That's Emily Graffeo in for Carol Masser. We are getting some headlines crossing the Bloomberg terminal. It's still earnings season. The latest, though, headline not having to do with earnings. Intel saying that Apollo is going to acquire 49% equity interest in a joint venture for $11 billion. That redhead just crossing the Bloomberg terminal. We'll bring you more details as we do get them. Well, Emily, 25 years ago, the singer-songwriter, dancer, superstar Usher Raymond IV, known to all of us simply as Usher, started an organization to, in its own words, transform the lives of under-resourced youth through a comprehensive program which develops passion-driven global leaders. Since then, the Now nonprofit has worked with more than 50,000 young people here in the U.S. We've got with us Carisha Moore, president and CEO of Usher's New Look, also known as the UNL Foundation. Carisha joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Welcome.
Thank you, Tim and Emily. Nice to see you and be able to share a little bit more about UNL.
Well, and welcome to New York, because I believe you're based in Atlanta.
I'm based in Atlanta.
What brings you to New York?
Today, we are hosting our Women of Influence Spring Tea that we host here annually to celebrate women in business and philanthropy and in the community for the great things that they're doing that relate to the mission of the organization. And so we have this tea. We'll be honoring some women from IBM, Chase, as well as Saks, but there'll be women from various industries as well as youth in our program to be inspired, but also to inspire.
So tell us more about UNL. How did it come to be, and what was Usher's involvement in the beginning?
In 1999, Usher was thinking, how can I help young people get a new look on life? He and his mom, they actually sat in the courtroom of Judge Glenda Hatchett and observed a court proceeding, a juvenile proceeding. And they said, these young people, they're leaders. They just need mentors. They need some support. They need exposure. And so he created Usher's New Look to be able to provide that and give youth a new look on life through workforce development, but also exploring their spark, their passion. He found his passion early on and knew that that changed his life. And so to be able to provide that to young people 25 years later is exactly what we're doing.
I want to share with people information about the program because I think it's unique in several ways. One is that it's a decade-long program, but also that it starts essentially when these kids are teenagers. So it starts relatively late. Take us through what exactly happens to these teenagers over that 10-year period.
Right. So from 14 to 24, our young people can participate in Usher's New Look. And we have standard-bearing comprehensive programming that starts with one-day training that we host in schools. And the unique thing about that is that it's peer-to-peer. So our post-secondary students are standing in front of their peers, 14-year-old, and teaching them about leadership, about business, about financial literacy and their spark. We also have an after-school program for high school students in Atlanta as well as in New York, where they do a deep dive into our 4 pillars: talent, education, career, and service. We believe those 4 pillars help to develop global passion-driven leaders. And then once those students graduate high school, which we have 100% high school graduation rate for students who participate, they go on to post-secondary. And we support them with transition into adulthood by teaching them executive functioning skills, but also connecting them with companies, internships, and learning about life skills that they need to be amazing citizens that they are.
It's interesting that you start in middle school. Can you talk a little bit about, at least for the youngest kids in the program, what are the top resources that they need right now?
The top resources that they need, and we just did a study actually last year with young people. What do you feel is the most prevalent issues facing you and your peers? And those top things that came out right now are mental health supports and strategies to help them cope with those things. As we know, we have come out of a global pandemic, and so that has changed a bit, but also learning about financial literacy and exposure to various careers. You know, if you can't see it, you can't be it, is what we say. And so being able to show them various careers where they can use their skills and talents is important as well.
Why is 14 to 24 the right age to focus on? I was talking with Elizabeth Sedrin, our producer, about this earlier. And the idea, there are a lot of nonprofits that focus on essentially college to cradle, right? The idea, or cradle to college, excuse me, the idea of starting very young and going to college age. Why focus on 14 to 24?
That's the age where they're starting to increase their future orientation. They're understanding their agency in developing the life that they want at that time. And so we're able to share and impart upon them the skills and strategies that they need to be successful.
Do you ever get any pushback from folks who say that's too late? We need programs earlier.
You know what? No, there are 42 million young people here in the United States. And so there are organizations that focus on younger, and we happen to focus on that 14 to 24. It's not a silver bullet. It's not that just 1 year, but we stay with them for the entire time, as you notice, 14 to 24.
It's intern season, Tim. I'm wondering.
I came in yesterday morning, it said welcome interns.
There's a lot of interns. There's a
did.
lot of kind of early career energy in the building right now.
Yes.
You know, what kind of resources are you giving to those older, I guess, students and early career people in the program? What exactly are they looking for?
Right, so we partner with various private and public sector entities to help do resume reviews for the students. They do mock interviews. They learn about different careers that are out there. They also learn about the internship process. You know, we don't want to assume that they know exactly how that works. And so we start teaching them from the time that they are in high school, 11th grade through college, what they need to do to be ready, but also providing them with the skills that they need, especially when you're talking about work of now and the work of the future. So we have a partnership right now with IBM where our students are having access to IBM Skills Build so that they can learn more about artificial intelligence, but also career-ready skills so that they're ready to not just do the careers of the future, but also lead.
We're Bloomberg. We love numbers.
Yes.
You mentioned 100% graduation rate, which
Yes.
is just incredible for any program. I don't care what program we're talking about here, but 100% anything is amazing.
Right.
What are some other metrics that you use as kids get closer to aging out of the program? I can't call them kids, actually, as
Right,
these
they're
young
youth,
adults
young adults.
get closer to aging out of the program. That is a metric for success. Like, how do you know this is working?
Right, so we work very closely with evaluators. We have a logic model that focuses on our objectives, and what we're looking for is change in behaviors and attitudes. So we're looking to the fact, do they have a physical resume? Are they ready to go to work? But also, do they have a changed thought about their impact and what they can do in their community, how they can lead in their community, as well as the skills that they have gained? Do they have a bank account? Do they understand what savings and personal budgeting means for them? And so those are some of the objectives that we have as well.
We talk about this all the time. These personal finance skills, this is not taught in school.
Right.
You only know about this stuff if you learn from family, friends,
That's right.
mentors.
That's right.
So you leave college or leave high school not knowing simple things that look simple to a lot of people, but are actually kind of tough to do on your own.
Exactly, and we find ourselves busting a lot of myths that they may have around credit, around saving, around just earning potential and those sorts of things. And what we find is that, again, through our evaluations, that financial literacy scores the highest on all of our training. It's what our young people say, I didn't know much about that at all, and now I know a lot, and I'm able to share that with my peers as well as my family. So you're right. I mean, we don't talk about it a lot. It's pretty taboo, but they're learning and they're able to go and share and be ambassadors with their community.
It's really empowering, and that's I'm wondering if you have any other examples of kind of a statistic like that, so we can end on a high note.
Absolutely. So when you talk about first-generation college students, about 51% in the United States, and we are now at about 80% of our students, and getting them on to go on to career. We end up with about 90% of our students going on to college.
Wow.
And so when you have 81% first gen and 90% of them are going to college and graduating within 5 years, that is something that we are very, very proud of.
It is a really cool program. Thank you so much for joining us during your visit to New York. That's
Thank you.
Carisha Moore, President and CEO of Usher's New Look. It is the now nonprofit that 25 years ago, the singer-songwriter, dancer, superstar Usher Raymond IV started with his own mom. You're listening to and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Tuesday afternoon. Coming up next, we speak to the founder and former CEO of Yum Brands. This is Bloomberg.
4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise shares moving higher big time after hours, up 11% right now. HPE reported revenue that beat analyst estimates on a big jump in sales of servers built to handle artificial intelligence work. After an initial move lower, CrowdStrike shares are higher. CrowdStrike forecast revenue for the second quarter. The guidance did beat the average analyst estimate. After hours, CrowdStrike holdings up now by almost 4%. The other news breaking after the close of trading, Intel has agreed to sell a stake in a plant in Ireland to Apollo Global Management for $11 billion, helping bring in more external funding for a massive expansion of its factory network. Turned out to be an up day for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. Choppy session, but in the end, an 8-point gain for the S&P, now at 52.91, up 0.1%. Dow Industrials up 140, up 0.4. NASDAQ up by 0.2%. 10-year yield 4.32%, with a 2-year 4.77%. Gold down 1%, $23.26 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.2% to $73.36 a barrel. Recapping stocks higher, S&P up 0.1. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Next guest. He's a self-described trailer park kid who lived in 23 states before even getting to high school. He went to college, but he didn't get an MBA from an Ivy League school, like so many of those who do end up leading companies. He started as a copywriter at a local ad agency just out of college, and from there worked his way up to become an EVP, COO, president, and ultimately co-founder and president, and then CEO and chairman of Young Brands. It's the largest fast food operator in the world, based on number of restaurants. It's the parent company of KFC, Pizza Hut, and Taco Bell. And he attributes his success to a simple thing: being an active learner. It's what he writes his new book about. We're talking about David Novak. He chronicles all of this in a new book. It's out today. It's called How Leaders Learn: Master the Habits of the World's Most Successful People. David joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Welcome.
Tim, thanks for that really outstanding introduction.
You're welcome.
The least likely CEO ever. I love it.
Well, you know, that's actually where I want to start, because you've got a really interesting story, especially as a young person. How did you end up living in 23 places before high school?
Well, my dad was a government surveyor, so he did the longitude and latitude points and marked maintenance surveying in basically small town America. I was born in Beeville, Texas, lived in small towns, never on the East Coast, never on the West Coast. Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, Dodge City, Kansas. I'm the only person you know that's lived in Dodge City, Kansas twice. But we moved every 3 months. We hooked up the government trucks. My dad was with the surveying party, so we had like 15 families, and we all lived in trailers, and we moved from trailer park to trailer park. And
so you're with the same families the whole time?
Yeah, I had my neighborhood. I thought everybody did it. Everybody says, how could you live in a trailer and move all that time? But it was actually, I think, an idyllic upbringing. You know, I learned when you move into new environments all the time, you have to learn how to scope out situations, new situations, learn, you know, people. It really helped me with my people instincts. I always learned you're like one friend away from happiness. My mom always checked me in these schools, and she said, David, you better make a friend because we're leaving.
That's tough.
You know, I also learned that when you go into a new situation, Tim, it's really nice when you have somebody come up and make you feel welcome. So as I moved up the ladder in business, when I saw new people come in, I always made it a priority to come in and come up and say, welcome to the team, glad you're here. But there are all kinds of learnings I got from that upbringing, one of which is you just can't stereotype people. You know, there's no such thing as trailer trash. I had 15 families. All they wanted for their kids was to live the American dream. When I played Little League Baseball, I had 10 people out there watching me, other people lucky to have one of their parents there. It was very supportive and encouraging, and that environment was something I really tried to take into the corporate world as well.
So can you walk us through a little bit more of your career path, and then we'll get into your book. But I think everyone is so curious, how did you go from this kid in the trailer park to eventually CEO of a multinational company?
Well, it has a lot to do with the book, how leaders learn, because I have a very untraditional path. I went to the University of Missouri. I got a bachelor in journalism. My first 2 years, I was a very poor student, but then I found out I loved advertising, and I majored in advertising, and then I became really turned on. I started learning everything that I possibly could about it. I graduated in 1974, and that was back when inflation was almost 20%.
I know, we talk about it now.
And you know how hard it is to get jobs in journalism anyway, but the first job I got was a copywriter at a really small advertising agency in Washington, D.C. I liked that a lot, and then I moved on into account management in the advertising world, worked on Heinz 57 sauce. Then I went to Dallas and ran the Tostitos account and worked my way up the Frito-Lay account, which was a part of PepsiCo. And there I had a lot of success with the senior management there, and they recommended me to go to PepsiCo to run marketing for Pizza Hut. And I was the first non-MBA to ever go to PepsiCo and to run a marketing department.
Was this before or after you invented Cool Ranch Doritos?
It was after I invented Cool Ranch Doritos.
That was part of the success that you had there. They saw that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I write about it in the book because, one of the learnings I have is that you can really multiply your creativity and your innovation by being a pattern thinker. So we had nacho cheese Doritos, which was really doing well, but it was starting to slow down a little bit. So we were looking for a new product idea for Frito-Lay. So I said, team, let's go to the grocery store and see what's happening there. So we walked up and down each aisle, and we got to the salad dressing aisle, and we saw that ranch flavored salad dressings was the most popular new flavor that had been introduced. So I came back and I called Dennis Hurd, the head of R&D for Frito-Lay, and I said, do you think we could do a ranch flavored Dorito? And he said, absolutely. And Emily, I'll tell you, when those Cool Ranch Doritos came off the line and we had them, we knew we had a home run. It tasted great. And then we learned from nacho cheese Doritos. Nacho cheese is, you have a known quantity cheese and you want to put a unique image to it, which is nacho. So he said, what can we call our ranch flavored Dorito? And we called it Cool Ranch Doritos, and the rest is history.
I mean, now you've got, taco shells made out of Doritos
and ranch flavored, so that's again pattern thinking, where you take two seemingly unrelated things and you bring them together and you come up with big ideas. I always say most innovation is a derivative of something else that's going on somewhere in the world, and as a learner, you need to be curious enough to see what's going on out there, and then asking yourself a very simple question. How could I apply this to my business? Or if you're learning from an individual, what is that individual doing that I could do to propel my career or make me better, make me stronger at what I do?
So at what point in your career did you come to this idea that you talk about in the book, active learning? Was there a particular moment that you remember it kind of struck you?
Well, what happened to me was when I started loving what I did, I wanted to learn everything I could about it. And then when I was, at Yum Brands as a CEO, I was always interviewing people, and it really hit me that the avid learner is really what you want, because they love what they do and they're trying to get better. And then when I was writing this book, I started out with the thought of being an avid learner, and I said, no, it's more than that. Because you can be a learner and be book smart, but if you don't put it into use, if you don't make it active, you're not really applying it like you should. So I said, what we're really talking about here is teaching people how to be active learners in their life and in their business. So it was sort of a progression, Emily.
You've, despite the fact that you are no longer CEO and chairman of Yum Brands, you've still been actively learning, and you have a podcast, I should note, that has had millions of downloads, How Leaders Lead. Some of the folks on the podcast are featured in the book and vice versa. You have some incredible names featured in the book: Tom Brady, Eric Church, Jamie Dimon, Indra Nooyi. Talk a little bit about who you wanted to feature in the book and really the message and how their message sort of ties together.
Well, I've done about 180 podcasts so far, and I just really was looking for stories that would amplify, the points that I wanted to make about, how to be an active learner, like how to prepare. Yamini Rangan, she's the CEO of HubSpot. I got to tell you, she was so prepared for my podcast that she made me want to do a good job for her, but that preparation is so important, and all the great leaders really have preparation. You know, so it's, I just kind of picked the leader and the story that would amplify the points that I wanted to make.
Yeah, talk about that from the Tom Brady perspective, because people might look at Tom Brady and say, this guy, you know, during his career was good enough at football, but he still, his routine, the prep that he did was just remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think people ask me a lot of times, who's the most impressive leader I've ever met? I think it is Tom Brady.
Really?
Because he knows his trade. He knows how to inspire his teammates. He knows how to raise the bar. He knows how people are different. He treated Gronk different than Welker. You know, he just understood, you know, how to pull all the levers. And he is an active learner. Right now, I know he's getting ready for the broadcast booth. Yeah. And I guarantee you he's going to want to be the best color commentator for Fox that he can possibly be, because that's who he is. But I know he's spending time with Nance. I know he's learning a lot from other people. And, you know, that's what he's into. And like, he went to Tom House to learn how to throw the football and throw it better. Now, he could have gone to Tom House and learned and go back and do the same old thing he's done. Right. No, he turned it into action and improved his footwork, and he thinks that's how his career was extended.
David, sit tight, because we're going to do some news, and then we're going to come back with more on the book and more from your career. We're speaking with David Novak. He is the founder and former president and CEO and chairman of Yum Brands. His new book, How Leaders Learn, Master the Habits of the World's Most Successful People. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. President Biden unveiled a series of measures to curb asylum claims and head off a surge of border crossings this summer.
Today, I'm announcing actions to bar migrants who cross our southern border unlawfully from receiving asylum. Migrants will be restricted from receiving asylum at our southern border unless they seek it after entering through an established lawful process.
Progressives call the moves draconian. Republicans say it's too little too late. Narendra Modi vowed to continue as India's prime minister even after his party lost its majority in parliament. Bloomberg's Bobby Ghosh says the news itself is striking.
This is a figure, Narendra Modi, who has dominated the Indian political landscape like no politician going back a couple of generations. For 10 years, he's been front and center of Indian politics. He sort of commanded an aura of invincibility.
Bobby Ghosh speaking with Tim Stenovic and Carol Masser earlier this afternoon. India's ruling alliance led by Modi crossed the majority mark of 272 seats required to form a government for a third consecutive term if the partners of the bloc can stick together. Hamas has followed Israel in balking at President Biden's efforts to end their war in Gaza. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller says Israel is ready to move forward.
The proposal on the table is nearly identical to what Hamas said it would accept just a few weeks ago. Israel has said it is ready to implement it. It is time to finalize this agreement, put an end to the violence, and to build a better future for both Palestinians and Israelis alike.
A Hamas spokesman says Israel must commit to a permanent ceasefire and full withdrawal from Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Hamas must be destroyed before the war can end. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Lots of breaking news after the close of trading. SpaceX has received the go-ahead from U.S. air safety regulators to launch its massive Starship rocket on a fourth major test flight as the Elon Musk-led company works to make the vehicle operational and ready for regular trips to space. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise reported revenue that beat analyst estimates on a big jump in sales of servers built to handle artificial intelligence work. After hours, we got HPE up now by just about 11%. Also reporting after the bell, CrowdStrike Holdings. It delivered first quarter earnings that beat Wall Street's expectations. After hours, CrowdStrike up by 7.8%. And Intel has agreed to sell a stake in a plant in Ireland to Apollo Global Management for $11 billion. Stocks had gains today, spent much of the day swinging between gains and losses. S&P up almost 8 to 52.91, an advance there of 0.1%. The Dow up 140, higher by 0.4. NASDAQ up 28, a gain there of 0.2%. 10-year yield, 4.32%, with a 2-year, 4.77%. Gold down $24 the ounce, lower by 1%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.5%, 73.14 a barrel. Bitcoin holding above 70,300 right now on Bitcoin, up 1.7%. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 8, a gain of 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. I want to get right back to David Novak. He's the co-founder and former CEO and chairman of Yum Brands. He's here with us in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. He's got a brand new book out. It's called How Leaders Learn, Master the Habits of the World's Most Successful People. David, I want to go back to a question that Emily asked a little earlier and sort of ask it in a different way and just kind of like hear.
Oh, it wasn't good?
No, it was a really good question.
Come on, Emily, you got to raise your game up a little bit.
It's just like, I want to know when you realized, like when you realized at that you were an active learner. Like, was it when you sat down to write this book, or was it at some point in your career you realized that the reason I'm moving faster in the corporate world than my peers is because I'm doing this? Did you realize it at the time, or did you only know it when you sat down to think about your career?
I think I've realized it over time. I don't know if there's an exact epiphany point, but the one thing that I've always done a lot of is self-reflection and self-awareness. So I started that very early on in my career and would always, like if I was working in one job, I'd look at my boss and I'd figure out, what does that person have that I don't have? How do I get that skill so I could move up? And I constantly tried to get better and better. And I always told people, I'm not going to tell you I'm the smartest guy in the room, but I don't think there are too many people that are better at learning and collaborating than I am.
That's exactly why I wanted to ask this, was because I don't think a lot of people make time for self-reflection for their career as much as they should. And I'm wondering how you can work that into your day-to-day at your job. Like, what tips do you have for folks who are listening right now who might say to themselves, you know what, I do go to work every day and I think a lot about my job, but I don't take a step back and kind of look at the 30,000-foot view of my career?
Well, I think that's a great point, Tim, because I think if it's important, you got to put process and discipline around it to really make sure that happens. I think it starts out with an annual assessment that you make of yourself.
Oh, interesting.
And I always did what I call the 3x5 card exercise, or the 4x6. It really doesn't matter. But on one half of the card, I write down, this is what I am today basis everything I know. And then on the other half, I write down, this is what I need to be tomorrow to be even more effective. And that was where I would start on the self-reflection. And then what I would do is I would send out my 3x5 card to the top 50 leaders, and they would send me theirs. And then we would talk about how we were doing on that throughout the year, in addition to going through our objectives. And then how do you build it into your day-to-day? Well, I always started out the night before. I would always think about what I needed to get done the next day, and then I would think about who I had to influence, what the issues were going to be, and I get myself prepared to leverage whatever skills I need to have to make a successful meeting. Then in the morning, I would wake up, and I would always work out to get my physical being moving, and then also taking time to have personal reflection. And I write down 3 gratitudes, because I think one of the best things you can do as a leader is go in to work with your mood elevator high. If you make your best decisions when you're grateful and you're in that state of gratitude. You make your worst decisions when you're angry, revengeful, down at the very bottom of the elevator. So I always try to move myself up to at least 6 or 7 in the mood elevator, which is curious and interested, because I really believe that you have to bring your positive energy to work. People got to be looking at you and saying, okay, things are good. If you're walking around like Eeyore and you're the head of the company, that's a bad thing.
I saw something on Twitter that was about reframing the things that you tell yourself when you're going into work. So saying, I get to go to work today, instead of saying, I have to go.
Yeah.
Just these little simple changes they've helped me. I mean, I love getting to
Emily,
be
we write about, in the book, we talk about just adding one little word, yet. I haven't done it yet.
Exactly.
Just add that, just reframe it a little bit, and flip the script. If somebody's telling you can't do something, ask them, well, how would you do it?
Right. Another kind of like cliche that you hear a lot is people say, learn from your mistakes, learn from your failures. You had a failure that was made fun of on SNL. Can you tell us about how that went down and how you actually learned from your failure?
Right. What you're talking about is Crystal Pepsi. When I went to Pepsi, the category was declining. Carbonated soft drinks needed a real boost. When I looked around, defined reality, looked at the market, I saw that the clear beverages were really doing well. Clearly Canadian, water, anything that had any kind of healthy overtones or perception seemed to be working. So I was sitting in my office one day, and I said, what if we came up with a clear cola? And, I thought it was a great idea. And I called Roger Enrico, the head of Pepsi, and I said, what do you think? He says, great. I think it could be good. Check it out with consumers. So I go to consumers. They love it. Now I think I've really got a great idea. I rush it into test market. It goes into Boulder, comes off the line. Dan Rather, CBS News says today, Pepsi launched Crystal Pepsi. I think I'm a genius. Now I go to the Pepsi-Cola bottlers, and they say, David, this is a really good idea. There's only one problem with it. And what's that? And they said, doesn't taste enough like Pepsi. And I said, well, we don't want it to taste like Pepsi because it's a different kind of Pepsi. And they said, well, it doesn't have enough cola notes. Oh, yes, it does. We don't want it to have too many cola notes because we'll cannibalize base Pepsi. So I totally dismissed what they had to say. And so I was a heat-seeking missile, got it on the Super Bowl. It was the only product in the history of Pepsi-Cola Company that was premium priced as an introduction because the Pepsi-Cola bottlers said that it wasn't going to be around that long, because they knew they could sell a lot of it, but then it wouldn't be a repeat. And so we launched it. Guess what happens? Everybody buys it, but the repeat's very low because it didn't taste enough like Pepsi. They were right. And the learning that I had is that, one thought I always had was some people say it can't be done every step of the way. And that means you as the leader, you got to just step up. You got to get it done no matter what, because they don't get what you get. Well, the first thing you got to ask yourself is, are they right or not? And I was such a heat-seeking missile to get this into the marketplace. I knew I was right, and I didn't care what anybody else had to say.
We have 30 seconds left, but talk about how you recovered from that and kept moving forward.
Well, what I learned was you've always got to overcome the barriers and obstacles. And, you need to get the input, and you need to be a much better listener. And I've never forgotten that lesson.
David, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
David Novak is the co-founder and former CEO and chairman of Yum Brands. His new book, it's out now. It's called How Leaders Learn, Master the Habits of the World's Most Successful People. Got some great interviews in the book, including Condoleezza Rice, Tom Brady, Eric Church, Jamie Dimon, among many, many others. He's also got a podcast out with a lot of the folks who I just mentioned and more executives who he's interviewed. It's called How Leaders Lead. And he also includes stories from his own life, too. Again, the new book, How Leaders Learn, Master the Habits of the World's Most Successful People. It is Bloomberg Business Week. Tim Stenevec and Emily Griffeo in for Carol Masser on this Tuesday afternoon. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. CrowdStrike holding shares up 6%. CrowdStrike delivered first quarter earnings that beat Wall Street's expectations, despite a pullback in spending that has challenged its cybersecurity rivals. Again, after hours, CrowdStrike right now up by 6%. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise out with revenue that beat analyst estimates on a big jump in sales of servers built to handle artificial intelligence work. After hours, we've got HPE up by 11%. It's going to take as long as it takes to turn around quality control issues at Boeing. That's what CEO Dave Calhoun is saying as the plane maker continues to work to regain customer and investor confidence after this year's door plug blowout on a 737 MAX. Calhoun says Boeing will be able to get past this crisis.
We presented this comprehensive plan to our regulator. Here's one thing I want to make sure everybody understands. This is our plan. It's not our regulator's plan. This is our plan. It's not our regulator's plan. They will provide oversight like they do, and they will regulate us, but it has to be us. We got to believe in it. We got to love it. We got to want to do it. And we got to take the pain that goes with slowing down the factory.
Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun spoke with Bloomberg's Guy Johnson in a moderated discussion at the Berlin Aviation Summit. You can catch the full conversation on the Bloomberg Talks podcast. Elsewhere in the industry, American Airlines Group is pushing a federal appeals court to overturn a decision invalidating its partnership with JetBlue, saying the ruling would prevent the airline from entering into future joint ventures. JetBlue up 0.5%, American up by 0.1%. Those are our top company stories, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenivek. That is Emily Graffeo, in for Carol Messer this afternoon. And who is that to my right?
I don't know.
It's Doug Krisner.
Some guy just walked into the studio, showed up.
I love it when you show up.
How are you doing?
We're doing well. You got a program coming up, Bloomberg Daybreak Asia with Brian Curtis tonight at 8 p.m. Wall Street time. I'm guessing India is going to be a big
Huge
topic of discussion.
Story, right?
Okay.
So you saw the market. Did you see the reaction in the equity market?
Yeah, we're staying years.
The Nifty 50, yeah.
4 years,
at one point it was down 8.5%.
Yeah,
We finished off the low, but it was still a kind of a pretty bad day if you were long Indian stocks. Here's a market that many people have been expecting to outperform. A number of people, Elon Musk, Jamie Dimon, they've all looked at India as being the kind of the next growth story away from China.
You have every big company CEO going there and taking pictures with Narendra Modi.
Yeah, that's right.
Over the last few years, especially tech
So
companies.
now his party, the BJP, loses the majority control. They are forced to form an alliance, and there's a big question mark over how economic policy may change. It's kind of a bit of an earthquake moment, I think, for Indian politics. So we're going to be talking about that as well.
I think you're right, and I asked Bobby Ghosh, who was in earlier with us, talking about this, about the company angle, because, like you said, Elon Musk was supposed to be over there a few months ago. You have pretty much every big-name CEO from tech companies. You have Apple trying to build more in India, and Bobby made the point that, at least from the perspective of those companies and those leaders, perhaps, and we'll have to wait and see the outcome of the election completely, and what ends up happening to the government. But he doesn't know if much will change in that agenda, in that arena.
I think it's too soon to be able to make that call from what I've been reading, and there is a really slim chance that Modi may not get the prime ministership as a result of the coalition not breaking the way that he would need to in order to remain in power. I think that's a real low probability event, but it needs to be considered as a possibility, which is one of the things, too, that maybe you saw reflected in equity market action. Although I think that has to do more with the question mark over this coalition, the alliance that the BJP is going to have to form, and whether or not they're going to be able to push forward aggressive pro-business policies at the expense of some of the other issues when you're dealing with still inequity across the country, youth unemployment, which is not dissimilar to the story in China. So there's still a lot of issues that we, going to have to wait and see how they play out.
Yeah, I have to say from the ETF side, a lot of issuers have now launched India ETFs.
Yeah.
It's been a big macro theme all year, especially on Twitter. A lot of people just talking about how it's going to surpass China's economy and population growth. So it's interesting that now we're getting this political turmoil.
Well, you have
Well, not
companies like
turmoil, but,
Amazon who
volatility.
tried to succeed in China, for example. It found out it was a lot harder. It was easier said than done, and then looked to India as the market with the 1 billion people that was developing.
You know, it's kind of interesting, too, because the Modi government has really not stood against Russia's war in Ukraine. Yeah. They're continuing to take in Russian crude oil. So it's a very close relationship that the Modi government has with the United States. But if you look at some of the decisions Modi's government has made, it's not in complete alignment. It's kind of it's a delicate situation right now, and this just throws in a level of uncertainty.
Okay, so India, obviously, a huge story
big
tonight.
India, big India.
What
And
else
the
is
other
on
thing
the
is, I
agenda?
mean, I think we pulled down in yield today, the Treasury curve, although the dollar wasn't very weak. Yeah. But what I did see when I looked at my monitor was a rallying Japanese currency against the greenback. There was a report yesterday, maybe suggesting that the BOJ is going to be buying fewer bonds, Japanese government bonds, in the market. And so that was one of the things that maybe supported the currency, that we're getting some kind of change in BOJ policy. It's been this slow and steady process.
Doug Krisner, he and Brian Curtis, 8 p.m. Wall Street time, Bloomberg Daybreak Asia. Emily Griffeo, thank you for filling in for Carol this afternoon. Certainly do appreciate it. That does it for Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stanovic with Emily Griffeo. Bloomberg Balance of Power starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Limes.
President Biden issues an executive order to shut